Recording in progress.
General Plan Subcommittee, Tuesday evening, August 29th, 2023. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Well, good evening. Welcome. We're here in person, which is kind of nice.
Excuse me, Chair. Can we do a roll call first?
Yes, I guess we could. Okay, Mary, please call the roll.
Chair Robbins?
I am here, partly.
Vice Chair Walnick is absent. Committee Member Chin?
Here.
Committee Member Lorraine?
Here.
Committee Member Nash?
Here.
Committee Member Nugent?
Here.
And Committee Member Patel? Here.
Thank you, Mary. We're here in person, which is nice. We're also virtual. Do we have anybody online, Mary?
We do have a few people online.
Excellent. Okay, for those attending in person, we have one person at this point. If you wish to speak when we have the public comment, please complete a yellow request to speak slip, hand it to the clerk, to Mary. If those who are participating remotely, when it comes to the public comment, if you're in the Zoom room, you'll be called at the appropriate time. You can just do the hand raise icon. If you're on the phone, press 9 to raise your hand, and then when you're called upon, you press *6. *9 to raise the hand, *6 to unmute. So let's go on. First item is and the only major item, is the overview of the draft general plan. And everybody up here is a veteran of this system, of course. So I will do a quick overview. We're going to do the staff presentation. Then we will have clarifying questions. And the only stickler I'm going to try and be is to keep that to clarifying questions, because we're going to have a ton of time at the end to do comments and further questions. And because we're not actually voting on anything, we can make that a dialogue with staff and with everybody here. So I try not to get too off onto comments in the question period, if you don't mind, because I then want to get to public comment, which is, I think, an essential function of what we're here for. And after that, we'll all be able to have a really open dialogue, which I look forward to. Thank y'all. Staff presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. Zach Dahl, Deputy Director with the Community Development Department and Project Manager for the General Plan Update. 1 second while I share my screen here. There we go. All right, so
You're actually, is it good now, Mary? Yeah.
we are before you here this evening to present and discuss the Draft General Plan 2040. Before we get started, I do want to acknowledge the team that has been supporting the General Plan Update effort. In addition to myself, Joanna Jansen with PlaceWorks is here and will be joining in the presentation. We also have Carrie Stone and Summer Smith, who are also supporting the effort. We have our staff team of over 40 staff members from throughout the city, as well as the fire department, and a consultant team which is led by PlaceWorks. For tonight's agenda, we will start with the presentation and provide an overview of next steps, answer any questions you may have, receive public comment, and then move into the GPS discussion where you'll have a chance to provide comments and input on the draft general plan. Our objectives for tonight are to provide an overview of the draft general plan. We have been receiving comments, so receive verbal comments here this evening from the public, and then facilitate a discussion and receive feedback on the draft general plan, and then wrap up by celebrating the general plan subcommittee's contributions to the draft general plan. It's been an effort, and this is the final meeting that you will have as a subcommittee. So I think that's definitely something worth acknowledging and celebrating. So here to provide a project overview moving forward, I'm going to hand it off to Joanna Jansen.
Great. Thank you so much, Zach. As Zach said, I'm Joanna Jansen with PlaceWorks. I'm excited to be here tonight. We always start our presentations about the general plan with the vision statement. You've seen this many times right now, but I think it's important to keep it in front of us as a guiding vision as of San Mateo as a vibrant, livable, diverse, and healthy community supported by the values of diversity, balance, inclusivity, prosperity, and resiliency. So just briefly, to bring anybody up to speed who hasn't been with us along the way, the general plan started back in the fall of 2018 with the establishment of the vision that we just read. We then spent some time identifying study areas based on a number of factors, including what was at that time Measure P and now Measure Y, and defining the boundaries of those study areas to exclude single-family residential areas and equity priority communities, most of equity priority communities. We then created a range of land use alternatives for the study areas, finalized those, and studied and evaluated them in order to select a preferred land use and circulation scenario over the course of 2021 and 2022. Prepared draft goals, policies, and actions last fall, and then put all of that work together into the draft general plan that we just published earlier this summer and that we're here to talk about tonight. Clicker is just really not. Okay. Throughout that process, the GPS or General Plan Subcommittee has been an integral part. I know its composition of individuals have changed over the course of the project, but many of you have been with us for many of these really important milestones. Tonight is actually lucky meeting 13, and as we look back on the work that the General Plan Subcommittee has accomplished through meetings dating all the way back to 2018, I just want to echo Zach's thanks and appreciation. I know all of you are on this committee because you are also on other commissions and committees and council, and so you have a lot on your plate already, and I'm really grateful that you were willing to add your voice as the General Plan Subcommittee to our process, so thank you. You can do it? Okay, great. So this is a graphic schedule. We've talked about kind of how we got to where we are. This graphic schedule shows where we're going next, all the way through adoption. As I mentioned, we published the draft general plan in July, and right now we're in a pretty intensive phase of gathering input on the draft general plan, as well as the draft EIR, or environmental impact report. So we're gathering that from the community, from the GPS, from the Planning Commission and the City Council. We will then be combining all of that input and feedback and bringing that forward to the Planning Commission and City Council for adoption, a recommendation and adoption in February and March of 2024. As we're in this phase of sharing the draft general plan with the community, we have put a lot of effort into making sure that folks can access the documents really easily, and we've given them a clear landing page on strivesanmateo.org to help you find the entire draft general plan itself, as well as different pieces and ways of summarizing or explaining or navigating the general plan, such as a user guide, a summary of some of the 10 big ideas in the general plan. Importantly, I also want to call out that strivesanmateo.org has an online commenting tool where you can leave comments on any page of the general plan itself, an interactive land use map where you can zoom in and click on any parcel in the city and find out what its designation would be in the proposed draft general plan, an FAQ going into detail about the relationship between Measure Y and the draft general plan, and many other resources, including resources in both Spanish and Chinese. So we want to make sure folks are aware of the resources that are available to help them understand the draft general plan, and that you as GPS members can help us publicize these resources. So with that, as the chair said, we'll just kind of quickly go through the general plan because I know all of you have already invested quite a bit of time in understanding it. One way that we're talking about the draft general plan, especially with folks who are newer to the process, is to try to explain what are the big ideas in the general plan. Some of these big ideas are themes that are carried forward from the existing general plan, like enhance San Mateo's neighborhood fabric and quality of life. And others of them are new things that reflect new concerns and new ideas that really aren't represented in your existing general plan, things like initiating a comprehensive sea level rise strategy, for example. So when we talk to folks without going through the entire explanation of what a general plan is, what a policy is, and what an element is, we just say, you know, what are some of the big ideas that the general plan is trying to accomplish? And these are some of the things that we talk about: travel, the economy, community outreach, equity, community safety, just kind of putting it in more broader terms that we hope folks can relate and connect to. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we do have to put all of the ideas and information together in a general plan. It follows this format that's very familiar to you, of elements covering land use, circulation, housing, which, as you know, has been prepared and adopted separately, the community design and historic resources, conservation, open space, parks and recreation, public services and facilities, safety, and noise. And then, of course, the general plan also has other important pieces like an introduction, a glossary, and an implementation plan to guide and ensure the implementation of the general plan actions and identify who at the city and other agencies is responsible. So the general plan includes three key themes that are really woven throughout the document. And those three themes are sustainability, environmental justice, and community engagement. And I want to spend just a second explaining why these are really woven throughout the document. Whenever we do a general plan, we always have to grapple with the question of what should get its own element. And if it's important, doesn't that mean it should be in its own element? Doesn't an element indicate this is a really important topic? And to some extent it does. But the reason why these are themes and not elements is because there are facets of each one of these topics that are expressed in different ways through different elements. So if you take a topic like sustainability, for example, that there are elements of I shouldn't say elements, there are ways in which how we get around San Mateo can be more or less sustainable. There are land use choices and patterns that can be more or less sustainable. There are things that we can do with our parks and open space that support the idea of sustainability. Safety choices that are sustainable. And so by ensuring that sustainability is an idea that is expressed throughout each and every element of the general plan, I believe that we help the general plan ensure that the city approaches sustainability in a comprehensive and holistic way, rather than isolating it in a single element. That question's come up a little bit so far as we've shared the draft general plan with the community, so I wanted to share my thinking about why it's spread throughout the general plan as opposed to consolidated into a single element. So another thing that's new and exciting to me about the general plan is that we've done a lot to revamp the way that it looks. We want it to be more accessible, more exciting, more appealing, funner and easier for everybody to use. So you'll notice that the pages of the general plan look very different. They're organized according to goals. The goals have an element acronym and a numbers to help readers orient themselves and understand where they are in the document. And then we have icons that identify each one of the themes. That can be another potential drawback when you do spread an idea throughout the general plan, is that people want to know, okay, great, you're saying that the general plan addresses environmental justice, but where? If it's not in a single element and you're telling me it's everywhere, where is it? How can I find it? So these icons that you see represent each one of the three themes, and they occur next to a policy or action when it is expressing one of those themes. And some express more than one, and they have more than one icon. So I'm not going to tell you every single thing that's in every one of the elements, but I do want to just give a sense, especially for our audience, about what is in the general plan and how the information is organized. So we have one slide on each one of the elements. We can come back to any one of these if you have any questions about it. I'm just going to give some examples of the content that are in each one of the elements, starting with land use. So this is where we talk about things like heights and densities, as well as specific parts of town that need additional land use guidance, like downtown or the El Camino Real corridor. This is also a place where the theme of environmental justice is addressed kind of in the most depth, and we provide the background for explaining environmental justice conditions in San Mateo in the land use element. The land use element is also where you can find the land use map that governs what can be built where in San Mateo and at what density or intensity. So the land use map is kind of not as detailed as your zoning map. We want to create a range of land uses that is broad enough to give the city some flexibility within a given designation or a given parcel, but also clear enough to provide some certainty about what type of development will be located where, and that this land use map can achieve the general plan vision. The land use map is really built around the 10 study areas from our land use alternatives phase that I mentioned earlier. So during the process of creating and evaluating the land use alternatives, we identified the 10 study areas that you see on this map as the parts of San Mateo that have the greatest potential to experience change, and also hopefully the highest potential to successfully accommodate that change, because most of the areas are near existing transit, services, and jobs. Some of these areas were identified as places that are likely to change because they have a lot of vacant or aging buildings that would be expected to redevelop over the next 20 years, and or some of them are places where property owners expressed interest to the city in considering redevelopment, such as the Hillsdale Mall site, for example. Another really important piece of building the land use map is considering the equity priority communities. This is a new concept for the general plan, and it ties into our ideas about environmental justice. Equity priority communities is our terms for neighborhoods, and there's two of them, North Central and North Shoreview areas, where we see that the community experiences both a higher than average pollution burden when compared to other neighborhoods in San Mateo, as well as other types of socioeconomic challenges such as low income or low educational attainment or language isolation. When we see that combination of burdens in a single community, that helps us identify places that need additional attention and help to improve conditions for residents there. And those are our equity priority communities. Those are also, you can find those in the land use element. So moving on from land use to the other elements, circulation is really where we talk about getting around San Mateo, and it emphasizes multimodal transportation and giving people options besides cars. So that includes walking, biking, taking transit. We also address traffic congestion and future roadway improvements, as well as parking in this element. Like the land use map, the circulation map shows our future roadway network and other components of the transportation network, like bikeways and transit services and pedestrian improvements. This is going to be implemented in greater detail with the other master plans, like the pedestrian master plan, TOD, pedestrian access plan, and bicycle master plan. The community design and historic preservation element starts with natural landscapes as the foundation of the physical fabric of the community. This is also where we address historic resources, public art, and design guidance for both residential and commercial areas. In the conservation, open space, and recreation element, we talk about natural resources, access to nature. This is where we have goals and policies specifically focused on creeks and riparian areas, as well as air quality, which is a topic that we talked a lot about, and parks and recreation, including access and the types of parks that we want to plan and provide to San Mateo residents. The public services and facilities element addresses all sorts of different services and facilities that are necessary for a complete community: police and fire, water, sewer, storm drainage, energy and telecommunications. We also have goals and policies here that are specific to children, youth, and schools, and healthcare and social services. And then the safety element also addresses aspects of public safety. In addition to the stormwater, police, and fire that are in public services, safety is where we talk about preparing for and protecting the community from especially natural hazards that might be present in San Mateo, like earthquakes, flooding, sea level rise, wildfire, and hazardous materials. And then finally, the noise element is where we address the long-term noise environment in San Mateo and protecting existing and future residents from excessive noise, how to measure and regulate noise, how to reduce and mitigate noise, including from construction and other temporary noise sources. So let's see, are you doing this or me? Me? The general plan, obviously we've put a lot of work into it, and so we want to make sure that it is implemented and that it's translated into reality going forward. So an important way of doing that will be through accomplishing the actions. We're going to consolidate those into an implementation plan, as I mentioned in one of the earlier slides. The actions are kind of the to-do list for city staff. Some of them are easy things that city staff already does on a day-to-day basis. Other things will be significant initiatives. So one of those more significant I shouldn't say one time, but we're going to do it first, is to prepare the comprehensive adaptation plan to reduce climate change risks. So that would be something that the city first needs to create and adopt, and then that will be on its own track for updates and revisions in the future. Establishing and maintaining an inventory of historic resources. Those are more kind of significant efforts. And then we have examples of ongoing efforts like ongoing coordination with Caltrain and Samtrans, for example, on transit improvements. The general plan will also be implemented through updates to the zoning code and other adopted plans, as well as each year in the city budgeting process. So now I will turn it over to Zach to say a little bit about the relationship between the general plan and Measure Y.
Great. Thank you, Joanna. One of the big themes that has been heavily discussed throughout the process is Measure Y, and actually when the update process started, it was Measure P. And that discussion started, and that was really kind of the genesis of the study areas. And how do we move forward with a middle ground to meet our needs when it comes to housing and growth, while maintaining the densities in the neighborhoods and other quality of life characteristics that were deemed important. And so concurrently, in 2019 and 2020, while there was Measure Y moving forward on the ballot, the city was moving forward in establishing these study areas. After the adoption of Measure Y, that was indicative that would stay in place throughout the general plan update process. And so really then that moved forward with how does the general plan, how does it have a 20-year vision, balancing both the voters and their approval of Measure Y and the need to meet state mandates for housing and growth that must be accommodated within the city of San Mateo. And so what has kind of materialized there, and this is an ongoing community discussion, is what is something that the community can get behind to balance both of these. And the focal point really became allowing for increased heights and densities within the study areas, which as Joanna mentioned earlier, are focused around transit, around key areas like Bridgepoint and Hillsdale, where there are higher opportunities for more intense growth and change. And then by doing this, it allows the rest of the city to be maintained at current levels and avoid additional growth within our lower density neighborhoods. And so what we have here is we have the range of land use categories starting at residential very low all the way up to our highs, 1s and 2s. And really for the intensity level at medium 2 and then high 1 and high 2, those are the three categories that contain heights and densities that go beyond the Measure Y limits. And so as currently shown in the draft land use map, these three categories are only present within the 10 study areas. And obviously, with general plan adoption, Measure Y will still be in effect. And so we also have included a land use policy that speaks to this. And so even though the specific language in the current Measure Y is not rolled into the land use element, we have addressed it through this provision, which still says any inconsistency will default to Measure Y until such time that it either sunsets or is updated by the voters. And so this would then allow for the next phase, which I'll get to in just a little bit, of where do we move forward after we have an adopted general plan. But this is really based on the direction and the community discussion, what made its way into the draft general plan, and I would imagine there's still ample time to further discuss and make adjustments as needed to ensure that we are building consensus around a plan forward for the city. And so in addition, and this was based on direction received from council earlier this year, we are conducting a statistically significant poll in August and September, specifically asking questions related to the heights and densities in High 1 and High 2. And then that will be brought back to council in October to help inform direction on the land use element when that's brought before them. And so then moving forward, when the general plan comes back in the beginning of '24 for adoption, that will really then rely on that land use policy 1.9 that governs how Measure Y and a general plan that contains policies and actions that are inconsistent with Measure Y in that in-between period. And then following adoption, we would then move to working with council to craft a ballot initiative that could ultimately be placed on the 2024 ballot for the voters to vote on. So along with the draft general plan, we have been doing significant community outreach, and we're really just getting started. When the draft general plan was published in July, we sent out a citywide newsletter that really provided an overview of what was in the general plan, resources information, and steered people to our resource page on strivesanmateo.org. We have already held one virtual workshop that was earlier this month, and we're about to start with 5 in-person town hall meetings, the first of which is this Thursday, and we'll be moving around each district. We also have, we've been doing presentations to interested community groups. We have self-guided open house displays at city facilities, and then we're also doing pop-up events around the city, such as September Nights on B, Movies in the Park, where general plan teams are around answering questions and providing information. Because our goal is really to make sure that as many people as possible within the city are aware that the general plan has been published and have an opportunity to look into it and learn more depending on where their interests lie. So for the 5 town hall meetings, we did try to locate them around the city and made sure that one was located in each district. And so this gives people a chance to plug into a town hall in a location near them. But we do want to emphasize this is not only for district residents in, say, any district. Anyone in the city can attend any of these town hall meetings, but we want to make these as accessible as possible. With community engagement in addition, we also have our public meeting before you this evening. We have 2 meetings before the Planning Commission coming up in September, and then 3 more before the City Council in October. And the goal is with those council meetings is for all of the community input and input from the GPS and the Planning Commission to all be factored in and then guide the direction that is provided there that would then feed into the final draft, the final general plan that is published beginning of 2024. So at our virtual workshop, we had 30 attendees, half of which were first-time attendees, and I always love to see a high percentage of first-time attendees because that means we're continuing to draw new folks into the process. So we had a really good discussion. There was a variety of topics that came up, and a lot of questions and comments about housing and development, quality of life, the relationship with Measure Y, historic resources, as well as issues related to healthcare, childcare, and provision of senior services and making sure we address our aging population. And so beyond just the virtual workshop, we've already been collecting input at other events as well as via our email and then also the website. And there have been themes that have been emerging. I think most notably, there's been a variety of comments on a more focused discussion to address senior issues, and I think particularly around our age-friendly action plan. And then also both concerns and support for the plan for increased housing and density. Comments about ensuring that there's sufficient commercial and retail space to support our increased housing supply. Also quality of life and related to community design, focus on storm and flood preparedness, which is a very hot topic in the community right now, roadway access and safety, and then I think protecting and maintaining our neighborhood serving commercial areas. So these are just a snippet of the themes. There's a wide range of topics, but themes, comments that we hear repeatedly or themes that start to rise up, these are kind of what we're highlighting here. And so these then are feeding into some of the recommendations that we're already preparing when we go before council in October. And so I think we did want to highlight 3 specific things. The first of which, for study area 3, we are recommending that the church parking lot site at the end of the 25th Avenue commercial area be removed from study area 3. We are also looking to add a section in our public services and facilities element that specifically speaks to seniors and our aging population. And then we're also working with our flooding and stormwater team to make sure that our goals and policies and actions are aligned with the current dialogue that's happening in the community, because a lot has changed since the last time we reviewed these with the community and council last year. And this is just the start, and as we continue to hear input, I would imagine this list will grow as we prepare our recommendations for council in October. So just wanting to again highlight some of the most direct resources available for community members to provide input. We have an interactive general plan with a link on the draft general plan page where you can drop notes and comments directly on the page or section of the general plan that's of interest to you. And you can always email comments to us at generalplan@cityofsanmateo.org. So for next steps, the draft general plan was published in July, and that kicked off really our last really robust community outreach and engagement effort, which will run through the beginning of October. Our draft environmental impact report was published beginning of August, and that public review period runs through the end of September. We will then be going to council in October to receive direction on the draft general plan, and then that will allow the general plan team to move forward with publishing a final environmental impact report and final general plan beginning of 2024, and then have adoption hearings before the Planning Commission and City Council first quarter of 2024. So that does conclude staff's presentation, and we are now available for any clarifying questions that you may have.
Great, Joanne, Zach, thank y'all very much. I think I actually am the one person who's been on this subcommittee since day one, so apologize, but I think I can use people's first name after 5 years or whatever. Though we have 2 Adams, so I don't know what the hell I'm going to do there. I guess I'll use the last names. It's a good name, thank you. Clarifying questions. Why don't I start down with the smiling far Adam, Mr. Nugent. If you'd have any clarifying questions.
You know, as Chair Robbins has mentioned, we've been doing this for 5 years, and so much of this is not new. So I don't have a lot of questions because this is very familiar, and I don't want to go through things that we've already mentioned. So I'm going to hand it off to the next person.
Understood. Adam Lorraine, you were on this early on, weren't you, as when you were a fellow Public Works Sustainability Commissioner?
That's right.
For council member. Anyway, welcome. Good to see you again.
Well, thank you. It's very good to be back. And it is kind of cool, Chair Robbins, that I was able to be here for the first meeting and the final meeting, though there was a little bit of other stuff that happened in between. So good to be back. As someone who's newly returning to the committee, but who is not exactly new to the committee. I'm personally a little more interested in clarifying questions from the subcommittee, given the amount of experience that has gone into this process. But I will maybe get us started with a question or two, and then maybe I'll just defer and then see if there's anything else that I feel like I need to highlight. I wanted to ask about, the Planning Commission and Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission recently had a joint session in which they discussed a planning policy guidance from One Shoreline. I understand that some key pieces of that, or the earlier iterations of that, are a part of our general plan. But I guess I just wanted to see if we could dig into that a little more and explain how much of it has influenced what we have in our draft plan today. Is there room to include more? Is there anything that we're not including for any particular reason?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. The general plan team, has been working closely with One Shoreline. This started last year with the preparation of our draft goals, policies, and actions. We were able to provide that document to One Shoreline. The One Shoreline team, they did provide comments and questions on that. Most of their feedback we did fold in. Then similarly with the draft safety element, we did share them with them earlier this year, and they provided additional feedback. For the most part, all of their comments and input has been folded in. I think the one exception was with regard to some specifics for development standards, and our team had looked at that and realized we weren't ready to be that specific in the general plan. And I think a number of reasons where there's other efforts which I think will get to that level of specificity, but just we didn't necessarily want to put it in the general plan, because I think that's always the balance. This is a larger overarching document that is a 20-year plan, and things like our adaptation plan, our floodplain regulations are sometimes the better place to get specific and drill into certain issues. And so with that notable exception, I think we're pretty well aligned with the input and direction that was provided by One Shoreline.
Excellent, thank you. I wanted to ask for a little more elaboration and clarity related to the element that addresses historical properties. And I noticed there was some language in there that may acknowledge not just those that have been designated as historic resources, but potentially eligible to receive that distinction. And I see that we also have within implementation interest in conducting or perhaps completing a survey. So could you maybe give us a little more of a sense of what the ultimate vision might be for how San Mateo seeks to protect its historic resources related to perhaps an inventory and the current goals and policy language?
So yes, I think as identified in one of our 10 big ideas, as well as reflected in a variety of policies and actions, our goal was really to provide a comprehensive approach to historic preservation in the city. And so in that vein, it starts with a citywide historic context statement. So what is the history of San Mateo from its very beginnings to the present? Because that is then used to inform how you might go about conducting more specific neighborhoods, historic surveys, or identify the priority and preference for what merits preservation within the city. And so I think actually with having community discussions and hearing some input, we might actually look at consolidating some of our policies and actions to better reflect kind of that hierarchy. Because I think really our recommendation and as what we want to see reflected in that section of the general plan is starting with the context statement, updating our historic preservation regulations in our zoning code, or not in our zoning code, but in our municipal code, to ensure that we've got a strong framework and a clarity for how we go about designating resources or landmarks or a neighborhood. And then that would feed into then moving forward with more specific neighborhood surveys. These are time-intensive efforts, they cost money, and so starting with that bigger picture to put together that framework and then moving to more focused efforts depending on where the community priorities lie. So that's that overarching picture, and I think prior to going back to council, we might look at how we can better reflect that approach within our policies and actions. Because right now, I think we have a number of them, but it might not be clear kind of the order that we're recommending.
Very good. I appreciate that. And with that, I'm free to cede the mic to others for this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Seema.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions, but I actually think it would be easier to follow if we wait until we get to the comments and we're discussing specific elements. So I'm going to also pass to my other committee members for more general questions.
Very good, and there will be lots of time to bring questions into comments. Ken?
No questions, just comments. Thank you.
Great. Lisa?
It's somehow easier hitting the button on this side. So I'm going to have to take this back to the regular council meetings. But anyhow, thank you, Chair. And I guess I am the newest member of the committee since I didn't go to the first meeting. So it's very good to be here. A lot of my questions I've already given to Zach. So thank you very much for taking them in. Just a couple. One was sort of a historical one that I'm just not aware of. Was there discussion when you were starting out with the general plan and working through of putting more of a comparison with the current general plan in this general plan? Because it's sort of, Joanna has spoken a lot about this is new from the current general plan or this has changed, but there's nothing in the document that I could see easily that says, here were the big things we wanted to do in the current plan. Here's what we accomplished. Here's what we didn't for whatever reason, or we decided to change. And then how have trends changed? Well, we spent a lot of time talking about demographic and economic conditions, but they're pretty different than maybe what they were when we started the current plan.
I'll start and then I'll pass it off to Joanna because she probably has the most comprehensive background from start to finish on the evolution of the general plan. It's really been, I think evolution is probably the best word, because even when I started, there was probably more pieces that were language that came, and then as we were hearing feedback and receiving direction, it was being evolved and changed to reflect where we are now. So I think there's probably goals and policies that are fairly close to how they are in the general plan, the current general plan, and then other ones that are entirely new. Similarly with the narratives, there's vestiges, but a lot of it has really been updated to reflect where we are now and where we're going over the next 20 years. So that felt like that would have been a challenging exercise if we were going to try and reflect that in the general plan itself. So it was more working, and then we've got this document because it also flows and is organized significantly different from our current general plan. So sometimes pieces that were in one location in the current general plan are an entirely new location, and we have new elements altogether in this general plan as well. So I don't know if you had any further thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was going to make a similar point about the organization. I think there's a couple of different questions embedded there. We definitely started as one of the early tasks with us consolidating data on existing conditions and projected trends and kind of looking at where we are today and where we think we're going to be in the future. What does this general plan need to be planning for? We also did do an assessment of the existing general plan with staff, especially including staff from multiple departments, and asking them what has worked well from this general plan for you. Which of the policies do your departments rely on to make sure that these are there so you can do your job? What's missing, and what do you see wanting us to capture in the updated general plan? So we got that from staff as we were working in particular on the goals, objectives, policies, and actions to make sure that we're really capturing both the existing content we want to keep and also the new content that's missing entirely. And then, yeah, as Zach said, I think we did start from the existing general plan, so just kind of like behind the scenes when we're writing the general plan, we don't just open up a blank Word document and start typing. We start from the existing general plan, but it almost immediately, as Zach said, we had ideas about so many things that we wanted to move, how we wanted the flow and the organization to be different, that it just pretty quickly became too confusing to navigate, trying to show, kind of attract changes or comparing the two documents within one document. And so we ultimately ended up with kind of a clean copy of the new general plan, but there are a lot of important pieces of DNA from the existing general plan that remain inside it.
Great, thank you. I'll have a comment about that later. And then the only other question was, in doing the community outreach, the team has done so much community outreach. I mean, it's really strong and good. I've heard from a number of community members, they'd love to find ways to go deeper. You know, that when you have the community outreach, I know they're going to be the tables by element, but is there something that can be done in that process rather than waiting for people to bring questions, to have specific examples of what could this mean to me in real life, just to help either start the conversation with the community or really allow them to go a little bit deeper, because I would hate to have this last opportunity. Well, I don't need to get into comments, but I've heard that feedback. Any way to just ground it into what does this really mean for me?
Thank you for that feedback, and we have heard that from other residents as well. And so I think what we're working to do right now is for our 5 town hall meetings to not do a slightly different version of the presentation you saw tonight, but really take a different angle. And so I think what we'll be focusing on is, what are the underpinnings of the 10 big ideas? Because what we try to reflect with the 10 big ideas is, what are themes that do have more real life application? Like, how do you, like, what are things that you will feel on a day-to-day basis, or policies that would impact a quality of life or an activity that you do? And so we'll spend some time talking about what are the areas of the general plan that support each of these 10 big ideas, because I think that's getting closer to relating to a day-to-day life for somebody. And then also going into focus themes, wildfire, historic preservation, our Hillsdale Mall shopping or Bridge Point. So I think we're going to try to do that with our presentation at each of the town hall meetings. And then obviously when we're engaging at each of the stations, trying to facilitate kind of deeper dives and highlight areas beyond just the title, but what is in this? What's the meat? So we're open to any other ideas, but that's kind of our objective with the 5 town halls, is to do a deeper dive and get to issues and questions that matter and have meaning to folks around the city.
Great, thank you. Those are my questions.
Great, thanks, everybody. Unless anybody up here objects, I think it's time to go to public comment. So I'd like to open it up for public comment. Mary, how many do we have online?
At this point, there's nobody, but if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand via Zoom. And there's nobody in person that is making a public comment, I don't think. Oh, okay.
Looks like there's one. Do we have a yellow slip?
I know that.
Okay. Then I think we're good with 3 minutes. Though I think probably for Rick, 2:59, just to keep it honest. If that's it.
Thank you.
Mr. Bonilla, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we turn the microphone on? I know you can hear me, but I would like for everybody at home to hear me too.
Exactly.
There we go. Thank you. So I am Rick Bonilla, former council member, former mayor, currently member of the Housing Action Coalition Board, vice chair of the Housing Leadership Council, member of the South Bay YIMBY Board. And so housing elements, general plans, things I've been working on for many years are kind of what I do. I have some comments specifically about what we're talking about tonight. And I apologize, I think I'm going to go over 3 minutes. I want to ask, since I don't see overwhelming public comment here, would it be okay if I go a little over?
For you, Rick, I think we can make that accommodation.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to read some prepared comments. I'm going to add some fill in as I go. Thus far, San Mateo's general plan has only studied rezoning pre-existing commercial and multifamily areas. As a result, the city overlooks easy opportunities to promote walkable, sustainable neighborhoods in single-family areas. Allowing missing middle density in these areas will help make our community more accessible to a wider range of people. Renters deserve to live in quiet, safe neighborhoods just as much as homeowners, which is why I support increasing densities in single-family areas, as I always have. From the beginning, when I was also at the first meeting of this particular panel, I said we need to make sure that this is not some sort of what looks like a specific plan to me, but it needs to be a general plan, which covers the entire city, which means every neighborhood should have been examined and considered for alternatives and ways that they could contribute to the growing, ever-changing, and increasing fiber of our city. So I support increasing densities in these single-family areas beyond major thoroughfares. The city can pursue these rezonings with SB 10, a 2021 state law that allows rezoning in infill areas up to 10 homes per lot without any CEQA review. As San Mateo grows and changes, as it continues to grow and change, no neighborhoods should be entirely exempt from changes unless there are environmental constraints. Much of San Mateo's flat, buildable land near downtown is either low or medium density and should be zoned for higher densities and higher heights. There are no environmental constraints there, only political constraints. In the True North survey, speaking of surveys, I see we have another one yet to come, 63% of San Mateo residents indicate support for allowing up to 12 stories downtown and near transit. Over the past 5 years, hundreds of residents have spoken in favor of increased densities. Let's support the majority of residents, not just the loudest, by increasing heights and densities. Allowing for taller building heights makes it easier for developers to provide playgrounds, parks, and other amenities. Let's support parks by increasing density and height. More density downtown and in nearby neighborhoods will make San Mateo a more walkable, sustainable, desirable community. Please pursue the highest density supported in the Environmental Impact Report. I also want to add that I'm aware of a current movement towards historic preservation of, a group who's trying to start with one neighborhood, and then the stated progressive movement was to go to other neighborhoods. And I understand historical preservation. If you have a nice place and you feel strongly about it, and it's maybe an heirloom home, something you want to leave in the family, you might feel strongly like you want to have it preserved. And I think everybody should be able to do that, as the law allows. But I see no reason why an entire community should be created as some sort of a district over the voices of some people in that district who most likely feel differently, although I know that right now the law allows the awarding body for that type of designation to overlook the voices of the people living there and look simply at the attributes of the buildings in that neighborhood and decide whether they're considered historical. And once again, I think that would create a burden, an unfair burden on individuals who don't want to have to deal with what comes with that historical designation if you want to make remodel or if you want to change your house. Some people we know like to buy a place and tear it down and build a new one. This is America. People have a right to change the property they own. I have to say that what I see is an effort to put up an invisible fence and gates around not only first the neighborhood, but then maybe the entire city. I strongly oppose that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. Do we have any other slips, this gentleman? No?
No other public comments?
No other public comment, including online. Is that correct?
Correct.
Going once, going twice. Okay. I will close the public comment period. And that will lead to, we'll open up for comment, and I'm going to toss out one. I'll have more. But the one, because it sort of reflects how little public comment we have here, I think everybody up here is a veteran of because of various commission and councils, of how difficult it is to get true public input. I've been to all these meetings and plenty of others, and often we get the activists on either end of the spectrum. So I think the staff and the consultants have done a laudable job. It's really tough, and it's something we're going to struggle with forever to try and get more and more input. But I particularly like the town halls. I mean, we're getting a little late in the day, but these 5 town halls, I would encourage the 3 people who are listening to this to show up, but hopefully the city's outreach will get some folks to come to these things, particularly when they're in a neighborhood. It not only accessible, it sort of hits on another point that I think I'll come up with later, which is to try to make this this whole document a little more personal, a little more impactful on individuals. What does this mean for me? Not me, but for anybody saying that. And I think at these town hall meetings, that's one opportunity for people to kind of get a flavor of that if they don't get lost in the weeds too much on these things. Okay, that's my intro comment. Now I'm going to start at this end because we started down there before. And once we go through, I really think it's fine to just have a dialogue, if you all don't mind. It can be a little chaotic, but everybody here is pretty experienced and known, and it'd be nice to have that, particularly including with staff and the consultants. Because
Through the chair, may I ask you a question?
you may.
Would you like us to go through all of our comments, or do you want us to go element by element? And my question may reveal that I have comments on multiple
All the
elements.
Yeah, okay. Maybe I'm going to start with Ken. No, let's see. A fair question. As you wish. I don't think going element by element, it would keep it shorter, but I don't think that really works. Because at least some of my comments would pervade all the elements. So, but also feel free to hold back some comments and bring them up later. It's not a one-shot deal for anybody here. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. That was helpful to me, too. So, number one, thank you to everyone, past, present, and future, because just publishing the document and getting it approved is not the end. And definitely it is much more approachable. You can get into it. Everything you said, Joanna, I think is absolutely true. And I went back and read through the current general plan, and while there are some nice illustrations, I think this is just a much more tangible way of doing it. So kudos for everyone to do that. I would say, just in terms of formatting, before I get into substantive questions, that it is an impressive document. I've killed a tree publishing this, but when it comes out and you put it on somebody's desk and they go, oh my God, how do I get into it, even if it is easier, or they go online. So I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to do an executive summary before each element that basically says, here's what you're going to see in this element. And it could be as simple as the sub-themes that you already, the sub-chapters you have in every element. And then here's what the impact will be, or here's what it means to me. And you'll hear me saying that a lot tonight. And I know the chair also made that comment about how do we get people to really understand that this is not just a big tome that will get dusty on somebody's shelf, which we do not want to have happen. So even if they only read the executive summary of every element, that's something, or you take it out and leave that. I just think something like that would be really important. Then a couple big areas, lots of questions that I have that I've already shared, but that I think need more consolidated attention. And I was very happy to hear that you're going to go back and look at seniors, because I think that's absolutely an area which is so important to our city both from the growing percentage of seniors in our population, as well as they're an incredible resource that we need to take full advantage of and make sure with the age-friendly initiatives and other things that they're really front and center. So it's throughout the plan, but I'd love to see it consolidated in some way, and it sounds like you're thinking like that. I think another area that I think is very important to really spotlight and not just have it sprinkled throughout is our local businesses, and the fact that our local businesses are fundamental to the success of San Mateo. And if they're not, whatever type of business that is, it's going to evolve over time. But they have to feel supported. They have to feel as if they are an integral part of the community. And I think we do a lot of that, but I think we really need to say that in the plan. And we talk about, we'll build infrastructure, we will make sure this happens and that happens, that's important. But a business coming away from reading this should say, wow, I'm really happy that I chose to open my business in San Mateo because I feel supported in so many ways, and I feel like I'm going to continue to be a really critical part of this community going forward. So some way of really trying to consolidate around that, I think, would be really helpful. I think, and Director Dahl, you and I have spoken about this, but there's been a lot of public comment about how do you balance the fact that we want to grow and evolve as a city, and that means getting bigger and broader and more diverse and all those things we're so excited about. But then how do we at the same time be very conscious and thoughtful about maintaining, it's not, somebody said, the charm of a small town. I don't know that that's it, but it's the placemaking that makes, it's not just that, that really makes San Mateo San Mateo. And what is it that can really try and unify all these things so people, I think it's also a way for people to feel more comfortable with growth. And you've got a lot more experience with that, but if they really have a sense of what San Mateo is all about, and here are the elements that are so important, and they're going to continue to be there, and they're going to continue to be woven in. Because I think a lot of the comments I've heard that are fearful or concerned are more about, I'm hearing all about these big, tall, dense buildings, but not about how the city is going to continue to evolve and still be what we love about San Mateo, no matter what the height of the buildings are or where they are. So I know in there you had a slight comment about wanting to do a brand kit that you and I have spoken about, and I want to volunteer to be on that committee, because I think that's part of what I'm talking about. What is it that makes San Mateo so important? But you've got to do a lot of work before you get to the brand kit. So I think that's something that needs to be consolidated and said right there so people can look and say, okay, I've got it. We are going to be a community that still is important about A, B, and C. Then another area which I think needs more concentrated focus, once again, it's in places, is how do we show our increased focus on building cultural and entertainment resources. You know, there are so many things in our community from different groups in the community sharing their history, their culture, which is great. And, you know, places like the B Street Pedestrian Mall give people to come together as a community, and the discussion in the general plan about the super blocks, which I think are phenomenal. That's part of what this is fundamental to that. How do you create culture and increase entertainment? You know, I think it was earlier this year, San Francisco Chronicle came out with an article that said San Mateo was the third best city in the Bay Area. We love that. The thing that they highlighted that we needed to work on was greater entertainment and greater cultural diversity and events. So I think there's an opportunity to really highlight that. And building on the existing resources we already have. And I think something like I just got a notice, I think everybody on council did, that the Peninsula Ballet Theater was changing its name and focus to Peninsula Lively Arts, because they're going to be involved in so many different things. That's a wonderful thing, and we should find ways of celebrating that, as well as what the library did earlier this year with Celebrate San Mateo. And I think that's it initially.
Great, thank you. I'm going to throw out a few more comments because I think I'll be briefer than some of the other folks. And I may come back with more comments later, as I expect we all will do. Mostly, I'm going to highlight a few items where I actually agree with Lisa. So it's easier to just do that. So me too. Senior aging, it's a huge piece of our community. And though I have fought a battle for years unsuccessfully to get the senior center's name changed, because as a senior, nobody I know who's a senior wants to call it that. I'm just going to toss that out there. I have failed miserably. My good friend Sheila Kanzian disagrees with me, and that's just life. But senior and aging, on a serious note, is really critical. I mean, that's a huge part of our population. And how do various elements impact them, or are looking at in a thoughtful way to improve quality of life or maintain quality of life for seniors. I also agree with the business development, economic. I had expanded a little bit, what are the positive impacts in each of these elements on small businesses, on workforce? We talk about circulation, and there's barely a mention of the real point is to allow people to get into the city to work. People struggle in this town to get workers in here, and as well as consumers. And, that pops up in a lot of places, but like every time we talk about multi-use, I happen to be a big fan of multi-use at all densities. Now that's a great opportunity to say, well, you're actually, that's providing resources for the consumers in that area, as opposed to having to get in a car and drive somewhere. So I support expanding in those areas if possible. I also agree on sort of improving the summaries, coming up with executive summaries. One way to maybe handle that, I'm not necessarily going to volunteer to do it, but for y'all, it would be to take the introductions they have, which kind of read like prose versions of indices, and make them more executive summaries. That's just my read on them. I think the introduction, if it was something where if an average citizen who wasn't one of these overly involved activists like all of us were to do nothing but read the summaries on each, they would walk away going, I see how this impacts me or the future, without getting into, policy this and action that, if that's possible. And then lastly, I'll talk a little more later. I want to let others come in, but I think we need to spend a little more time, and I'll elaborate later in the document, coordinating how this works with Measure Y and what we're going to do on the ballot. But I'll defer that because I don't want to suck up all the oxygen that can do. Ken? Thank you, by the way.
Great, thank you. I first want to thank staff for the presentation and all your hard work. I know it's been a long, 5 years or so? I think I've been part of only, past 3-4 years of it. But I do know it's a ton of work, and I just want to thank you guys for all your hard work on it. There's a lot that's in there. There's a lot of great stuff. And it's commendable to say how far you guys have come. So, my comments, there's essentially like 3 themes that I've kind of grouped my comments in. One talking about the future, one talk about funding, and the other one is about inclusive outreach. So starting off with the future, and some of this is just basically going down the elements, but it's just the thought that this is a general plan, 2040, and there's a lot of thought in here about either future technologies, future businesses, future circulation, a bunch of different things. But there's some things that I wanted to touch on and maybe elaborate and maybe request or put a little nudge in to be a little more aggressive. So one I think it's the land use element, we talk about surplus property. But nowhere in here, except for maybe the safety element, do we talk about acquisition of property. And there's many times throughout time, and you think about this is going to be the next 20 years, that different properties come up for sale, or we may need a property here or there. Whether it's for a future fire station, whether it's future park, whatever it is, there's no mention of possible acquisition of any additional land. And so it'd be great if there was some sort of goal or action in there for that. I mean, you just think there's a mention of, in the downtown, possibly some sort of community center or city hall designation, but there wasn't really anything about actually acquiring property. And so it'd be great for something there. I love the thing, just to go off of Vice Mayor Diaz, briefly talked about brand identity. You have this in the community design CD 611. I love that idea, the thought about who we are. In the past, I know that Public Works had looked at sort of streetscape design and streetscape signage, as other cities have done, but it'd be great to know, who are we? What makes us different? In the past, we're going way back, 2 general plans ago, we actually had, I think there was a goal or in the vision statement that sort of identified what made us different from other cities along the peninsula. And one of them specifically was Bay Meadows. And of course, we don't have Bay Meadows anymore. But the thought is, what is our identity? And so it'd be great to just touch on that. We talk about recycled water, but I would love for us to be more aggressive. Our wastewater treatment plant is going to be completed, according to the website, by 2024, let's just say 2025 or so. Earlier on in the stages, there was conversations about recycled water, and absent our most recent storms that have helped us out of the drought, the idea is that we will always be looking for sort of water, I think. And the idea just sort of mentioning about recycled water is one thing, but I would love it if there was be a little bit more aggressive to maybe take some action by 2040. And last thing about the future is public Wi-Fi. I know it's sprinkled throughout. I think it's a great thing to do, and as sort of our emergencies that we've seen either locally through the pandemic or through the fires in Hawaii, or whether it's the flooding and the after effects or whatever is climate change, public Wi-Fi may be a lifeline. We talk about public utilities and the safety element, but to really expand that would be great. And then also just related to that, as putting my school board hat on, would be, in real emergencies, people don't necessarily think about, I'm going to run to City Hall, or I'm going to run to the library. They're going to probably run to any public building, and that includes schools. And the thought is that it would be great to sort of reach across the aisle and say, hey, could we do something with the school district to develop public Wi-Fi throughout all of our public facilities within the city of San Mateo? So that's talking about the future, because I do think the general plan itself is a future-looking document and something that we should look at in terms of thinking about, where we want to go. In terms of funding, there's only 2 parts. One, there was a section in the land use element about the community health. I think it's the land use element. It talks about funding for community health and the policies and sort of goals about it, but it really only targets the park in Luffy, I think it is. I'm not gonna, it's in my notes, but it really only talks about I think it's the park in Luffy as funding it. So I'd love for it to say maybe park in Luffy and other additional resources, because I think, having community health, while it's extremely important, only be funded by the park in Luffy, I think that's sort of missing opportunities. And then also, just in terms of funding, when you look at, I think this is conservation element policy number 9, I'd love when you look at the parks, yes, it is conservation COS number 9. It talks about providing stable and adequate operation and capital funding for the parks and recreation system. I'd love if there was some sort of action item there, because we're all talking about like 20 years, that if we explore long-term funding, sort of to provide the stability and sustainability of the park system, also to improve it. I think when you look at those departments that are only funded by general fund and some minor fees, the parks is very, I would say, cyclical or reliant on how the city's budget is. And, when we really think about what makes the city of San Mateo, I think about our most recent Music in the Park series, which I'll look at to my two colleagues to the left. And there was one of them when I walked away after the Music in the Park series, and I said, wow, this is the city of San Mateo, right? Everybody was out, they were out dancing, they were listening to music, they were having a great time. And when you think about community events, this was one of those where I thought, wow, this is great. And especially after the pandemic. And when you think about new parks, or you think about the operational parks, it'd be great to actually look at some sort of long-term funding or some way of additional funding the park system. Lastly, talking about inclusive outreach. I love the theme. I love the big idea. There's one section that I felt like it could be enhanced. I'm going to go to it specifically. It is when we talk about historic preservation. And so in goal CD, community design CD5, we talk about preserving historic and culturally important resources to maintain San Mateo's special identity and continuity with the past. There's a section CD 5.4, which is public awareness, which is foster public awareness and appreciation. But there's nothing that actually talks about inclusive outreach like we have in the other, throughout the other elements. Inclusive outreach to me means, especially if your property is going to be designated or is identified as part of the list, that inclusive outreach probably includes those property owners, that they should at least know about it. Just making it public awareness and having some appreciation, they may not be fully aware of what the impacts could or could not be. Some may actually love it because having a historic building may actually raise their property values because they love it. And speaking to the public speaker, as an heirloom that they may pass along, they may actually love that and want the historic designation. And then others may not want it at this time. And so the thought is like what they should be aware of, what are the impacts. But overall, I think this is a great plan. And I do want to thank you guys for everything that you guys have done. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Seema.
Thank you, Chair. I do have some detailed comments. I will try to make it fast. Again, like everyone else, I want to thank staff for the enormous amount of effort that has gone into this since 2018, if I understand correctly. No small feat. I also want to thank my fellow committee members because you may see me taking furious notes. I appreciate the diversity of expertise and perspectives we have on this dais because I've noticed in these meetings so many times my fellow committee members see things and discuss things that never occurred to me. And so, all this time I've been taking notes and it helps me when the next iteration comes back to go back and see what did Ken say, what did Cliff say, and make sure I'm thinking about those same things. So I appreciate all of your thoughtful comments as well. So I'm going to start with the land use element, and I wanted to just note an overall appreciation that this general plan is estimated to create 21,410 new dwelling units and 16,900 net new jobs. It's more dwelling units than jobs. And I really appreciate that we are finally looking at that and thinking about truly balanced growth and potentially even making up for some of the imbalances that have happened over the past few decades. I also really appreciate the addition of Action LU 1.10, the review of new development to track growth of residential units and non-residential floor area annually. I think that's going to be such an important tool to see how we're doing and be able to course correct in real time and not just every 20 years or every 8 years with a housing element when we see that things are starting to go in an imbalanced direction one way or another. I wanted to talk about the descriptions next to the land use designations and ensuring that they accurately reflect what is possible. So residential low 1 is 9 to 19 dwelling units per acre, and staff helpfully provided that residential low 1 lots have an average size of 5,380 square feet, which I'll do the math for you is 0.12 acres, which means that the average lot in residential low 1, based on that 9 to 19 unit designation, would allow for 1.1 to 2.3 dwelling units. The description, though, says this designation allows for townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, condominiums, and apartments. So I don't know that we're really allowing for townhomes, even duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, condominiums, and apartments, given those average lot sizes and that density range. So I think that's something we should look into and make sure that that is an accurate reflection of what is possible. Similarly, for residential low 2, I'll just skip ahead and not do the math in detail for you. It looks like the average lot size would have a range of 2.3 to 4.2 dwelling units. Again, with the same description, townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, condominiums, and apartments. So here we can get up to fourplexes on the average lot size, but I think condos and apartments are a little bit of a stretch. So I would just examine that. I'm going to skip my next comment. It's a little in the weeds. I wanted to talk about fees, and I don't know if the general plan is the place to talk about fees. I was recently having a conversation with a developer who told me they had acquired a piece of property and they were trying to figure out what to do with it. It was zoned mixed use, and they put together, using our fee table that we have, put together proposed fees if they were going to do it as a mixed-use project or if they were going to do it as a purely residential project. And they told me that the fees for doing it as a mixed-use, office plus housing, if I remember correctly, were $9 million. But the fees to do it as a purely residential project were $16 million. Substantially more expensive to do a purely residential project. And I don't know, I kind of looked at the fee table, I couldn't really figure out what the breakdown was, and I think it might be the park fees, because the park fees are assessed on an individual residential unit. It turns out it's between $20,000 to $23,000 per unit. That's single family through multifamily, and it ranges depending on the unit. But that is, to me, we are incentivizing developing commercial over developing residential through our fee structure. And I think we might want to consider how we might flip that, actually, to better incentivize residential over commercial, at least in a short term until we get to something that approaches more balanced growth. Somebody mentioned commercial uses. I think we discussed this last time. I still would have loved to have seen a policy on accessory commercial units, which is like a new thing now. I have a neighbor who owns a bakery, and during the pandemic, they did pop-ups in their yard because they couldn't sell anywhere else. It was so popular in our neighborhood. And I asked them, why don't you do that just like permanently? And there's a thing you can get called like a cottage business license to be able to sell out of your home. But they looked into it and learned they could only have 4 clients visit their home per day. And when you're doing like a pop-up to sell baked goods, you hit 4 people in like 30 seconds, right? So it just didn't work. And I would love to see us be able to figure out how to let our small businesses operate out of our residential areas. So to your point, in the morning on Saturdays is amazing. Opened my door, walked across the street, got a scone, didn't have to get in my car. And so how can we enable that in our residential neighborhoods and at a scale that isn't going to be disruptive? I noticed that our use of residential high 2 seems limited to buildings that already would meet that designation. And so I guess this is one of my questions for staff that I'm just now thinking of. Is that correct? You might not know, but I was just kind of glancing at it.
There are definitely instances where we aligned the land use with the existing building,
Yeah.
but the majority of those sites actually they're lower density buildings. And I'm thinking of some of our larger lots, the PS Business Parks over off of Amflint at 101, Hillsdale, Bridgepoint. So Yeah, those definitely exist where the tall buildings currently exist in the city, but it definitely encompasses a significant amount of property beyond just those sites.
Perfect. I've been thinking a lot about how we get these mixed-use projects that we see at the Planning Commission, where when you look at the amount of commercial that is in the project, they're creating hundreds of jobs sometimes. I'm thinking of the Talbot's project, it was like 700 jobs. And then the accompanying residential is like 10 units. And I've been thinking about, we need to offset that commercial, but where are they going to go? Are we having to like spread the peanut butter really thin, whereas we're allowed to concentrate the commercial really dense? And so I don't know if I have a specific comment here, but I was looking at our use of residential high too, and I was just wondering, do we have enough? Do we have enough so that we can offset what seems to be a really high concentration of job growth? Maybe the answer is yes, looking at our overall capacity. I think it's just how we layered in through the city is a little bit different. Next thing on my list is environmental justice. So our draft general plan has 3 key themes: sustainability, environmental justice, and community engagement. And we discussed this at our previous meetings. Land use when it comes to residential and air quality. And at our last meetings, both for General Plan Subcommittee and the Planning Commission, there was general support to not locate residential within 500 feet of high-volume thoroughfares. But I noticed we still have that, particularly along 101, particularly along the north central neighborhood. And I am worried that doing that is not meeting our theme of environmental justice. And so I would just like us to think about that as we move forward. If there's an opportunity, one of the things we talked about was, could we swap some of the land use? Could we relocate some commercial or some industrial or some office to those spots and put that residential somewhere else? I had a question about the language of policy LU 1.9, which is the voter-approved growth limits, but actually the slide that staff presented was great, made it really clear what was happening, and so I might just have a little bit of feedback of somehow thinking about the language in the slide and thinking about the language that was in the housing element, and maybe figuring out how to incorporate some of that, like, if this, then this, if not, then that language that was in the slide, because I read that LU 1.9 several times and I wasn't quite sure what it was trying to say, and I emailed staff, but now it's much clearer seeing it in the presentation. Okay, circulation element. I noticed we don't explicitly talk about reducing vehicle miles traveled everywhere. We talk about it in a couple of places. We seem instead to focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so I just have a question about whether we want to be more explicit about reducing vehicle miles traveled. I'm thinking specifically of policy C 1.1. And there's a few other places where it might make sense. Policy C 1.5 used to say prioritize high capacity travel along El Camino Real. Now it says facilitate efficient travel and pedestrian safety. So this is a question for staff. Is high capacity travel, for example, bus rapid transit, no longer a priority for El Camino?
I'll start, and then Joanna, because I'm trying to think back, because I recall this discussion, and I think really the shift was focused around the notion that we didn't want to neglect safety, and high capacity, I think, was more envisioned as meaning quicker speeds, so you could get from point A to point B quicker. So I think at that point we adjusted the language because we didn't want to prioritize vehicle speed at the expense of safety. So I think that was the shift in language you're seeing, but if there's a more effective way, but I think that was the gist of why we transitioned that policy.
Okay, great. But if like Caltrans was like, guess what, we want to do BRT on El Camino, we wouldn't have a policy that would like explicitly oppose that or not want to do it.
Definitely not. I think, throughout a number of places, we very much support our regional transit plan and collaboration with Samtrans as they move forward with their initiatives.
Perfect. Action C 1.1. So we have a goal C1 that says we should prioritize walking, bicycling, and transit. And I was wondering if we should explicitly repeat that in our Action C 1.1, which is about our complete streets plan. I think you could maybe say it's implied because of goal C1, but I just wonder if it's worth being more explicit. So there was, I went back into the letter from Move San Mateo, which is a transit and walking and bicycling community organization. They had a couple of proposed actions that they submitted the last time this came before us. One of the ones that I thought was really good that didn't make it in was an action around a time-based goal to fully complete all infrastructure projects outlined in the city's revised capital improvement program, and to identify increases in staffing that we would need in order to meet that goal. I know, we've got this bicycle master plan that we made 10 plus years ago, and I think 3% of it has been implemented, if I'm remembering the stats correctly. And so I think there is a really good idea here around, can we put a timeline on these infrastructure projects and be able to come to council and say, if you want to do this plan in 10 years, you're going to need 20 new people. If you want to do it in 30 years, you need 5 new people, and just be able to give council some options about how they might reallocate or prioritize in the budgeting process to make that happen. This is really specific, but I was thinking, reading about some collisions lately, do we want to have proposed actions about leading pedestrian intervals and automatic actuation of pedestrian signals? Do we want to have a proposed action around right turns on red? I've had a few close calls in the last month at Delaware and Fifth, people not looking before they turn right on red. And I don't know if that's too specific for a general plan or if that might be part of some other circulation or traffic policy, but something to consider. This might just be a proofreading thing, but policy C 4.4 seems redundant to policy C 4.5. Policy C 4.4 seems entirely contained within C 4.5. And maybe a proposed action about prioritizing quick build projects. That's come up a lot. I don't know if that comes up in Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission, but I think we hear it in Planning Commission sometimes of trying to really quickly, can we do a really quick, blocking that slip lane off of Alameda de las Pulgas? Are there things that we can do to test out infrastructure changes really quickly, see how it goes for a month, and then take it down and evaluate? Goal C6, sorry, I know I have a lot of comments. Our capital improvement program, I think it says prioritize improvements that increase person throughput in project prioritization to reduce vehicle miles traveled. Should we explicitly state that it should not apply to projects that add lanes? Because I think adding lanes are sort of falling out of favor, 1, and 2, they would increase throughput. They would not reduce VMT. So I wonder if we should just be explicit there. And then last one for circulation element, parking maximums, goal C7, parking maximums. I feel like the language of this goal got watered down quite significantly. It went from parking maximums to parking requirements. The previous language was parking maximums, amend the zoning ordinance to replace parking minimums with parking maximums to allow the developers in the city the flexibility to provide parking at levels that encourage desired development and are appropriate to the conditions of the development and its context. And so now it says parking requirements, evaluate options to amend minimum parking requirements consistent with state and regional policy, et cetera. I won't read the whole thing, but I'm curious why that got walked back a little bit, if you happen to know. And what might be reasons we wouldn't want to be a little bit more aggressive in just moving from parking minimums to parking maximums.
I do recall the discussion, and I know there was some concern about being too committal, knowing and more exploratory or being targeted where maybe we're not doing it citywide, but in focused areas. So, but I would have to go back and look at the specific progression, but I think that was, those are pieces that were guiding maybe how that was adjusted.
I would just add that for this action and for all of the actions, the reason that they're in action is because there's more work to do.
Oh, okay.
Right? And so the policies, the way I think of it as, one of the authors of the document is the policies are typically pretty firm commitments about what we are going to allow or what we're not going to allow, right? And the actions, like this one, for example, is things like evaluate options. So we want to, a lot of times, put some parameters around the action or make some commitments in the action of like what we want to accomplish here. But we're not prejudging the outcome of the action because we know that for many of these actions, and this is a great example, there's going to need to be additional data gathering, additional community input, et cetera. So sometimes that's why we avoid getting too specific in the wording of an action because we want to leave room for what the outcomes of that effort is going to be.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's very helpful. All right, community design and historic resources. Policy CD 1.3, scenic corridors. It says, it currently reads, require new development adjacent to designated scenic corridors within San Mateo County's general plan to protect and enhance the visual character of these corridors. So two things here. Previously, we had our own scenic corridor map, and I remember asking last time, like, is Alameda de las Pulgas really a scenic corridor? So I appreciate that we're now aligning to the San Mateo County General Plan. But I will note I looked it up, and there are no scenic corridors in the city of San Mateo in San Mateo County's General Plan. So just FYI, right now that's an empty set. Maybe that will change in the future. But I wanted to point out that this policy starts with require. And I'm a little bit nervous about that word. We just had a meeting about objective design standards, the Planning Commission, and I feel like writing an objective design standard to require us to protect visual character would be really hard. And so I wonder instead if we mirror the language of policy CD 1.2, which says preserve to the extent feasible, that might make the objective design standard process a little bit easier. Policy CD 3.2, replacement planting. We talked about this last time. I will not repeat my whole comments from last time. I will just say that I remain concerned about the order of operations when you require replacement planting and how much money somebody has to front out of pocket. For me, when I did it, it was $1,000 before I could get the deposit back. And that might be a lot for, it is a lot for many residents in our community. And we did add action CD 3.11 that says explore funding sources, but I don't feel like explore is a strong enough word if we're going to make this a requirement. I think we need to have sources of funding for our low-income residences because in my case, with my tree, it was a safety issue. I had a tree that was leaning over a sidewalk, and I don't want to end up in a situation where people are not addressing safety issues because they can't afford the upfront cost. Okay. Policy CD 5.3, historic resources definition. So we talked about this last time. This policy defines historic resources as buildings, structures, sites, and districts that are listed in or determined to be eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places and or California Register of Historical Resources, et cetera. There's a little bit more in the definition. At the August 12th, 2022 meeting, just over a year ago, I asked why we were defining historic resources as buildings that are on or eligible, as opposed to just buildings that are on. Why were we including eligible? And Deputy Director Dahl, I think you said at the time, it's because of what the language currently in the general plan says, and we start with the language of the current general plan. And one of the things that staff was interested in was getting input from this committee and the Planning Commission and Council on things like this definition. So now, 1 year later, I think there have been some recent developments, and I have some input on this definition. So as one of our public commenters mentioned, there is an effort right now by the San Mateo Heritage Alliance and the Baywood Neighborhood Association to prepare an application to nominate the Baywood neighborhood for listing as a historic district on the National Register of Historic Places. I've looked into this a lot in the last 6 weeks, and I might be wrong and it'd be great to get staff input at some point, but as far as I can tell, the only difference between properties that are listed and properties that are eligible to be listed is owner consent. And so the application process to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places actually goes through the state, goes through the California Office of Historic Preservation. And I read the application process, I read the application, I read on their instructions for supporting or objecting to a nomination that should a majority of property owners object, the State Historic Preservation Officer will not submit the nomination to the keeper of the National Register for listing in the National Register, and may instead submit the nomination for a determination of eligibility. If the property or district is determined eligible for listing, although not formally listed, it will be given the same protection as a listed property. So policy CD 5.7 in our general plan outlines a higher bar for demolition of historic resources, while actions CD 5 and CD 5.12 describe additional review and permitting procedures and design standards for historic resources. Additionally, some state laws like SB 9 and SB 35 have exemptions for properties that are deemed historic by the local jurisdiction. So just like the federal processes, our general plan is treating listed and eligible properties the same by including them both in our definition of historic resources, when the only difference between the two, as far as I can tell, is whether or not there was owner consent. And my concern is that by including eligible properties in our definition, a single person with enough time could potentially get hundreds, maybe thousands, of properties or a handful of neighborhoods subject to these additional restrictions in our general plan, or exempt from state laws without the approval of property owners or city staff or city council. Essentially, we'd be losing local control over how these properties are treated. And I think these restrictions would be in perpetuity because I could not find any process to revoke the eligibility of a property or district once it has been granted. And in fact, the San Mateo Heritage Alliance stated on their website their intention to use learnings from Baywood to nominate the Central, North Central, Hayward Park, Aragon, and San Mateo Park neighborhoods for listing as historic districts. You talked about wanting to understand implications and impacts, and I think that's where I am right now. I would really love some perspective from staff. I don't mean today, I mean at some point in the future, on what the impacts would be to our city from that sort of mass listing. Just off the top of my head, I'm thinking about our housing element, where I feel like restrictions on that level I feel like would have to be listed as a constraint to development, and potentially a inhibition to affirmatively furthering fair housing. I'm concerned about the impact to our revenues. One of our action talks about a Mills Act program. So the Mills Act allows a local jurisdiction to provide property tax relief to owners of historic properties. So what is going to happen to our revenues if 20% of our city is declared historic and then exempt from property tax? I'm especially concerned about the impacts to the central and north central neighborhoods, which have a higher proportion of fixed and low-income residents. I worry that the cost to make repairs that meet our historic design guidelines may be prohibitive. This is based on my own experience. I got estimates to replace my roof. I live in a Spanish revival home, and replacing my roof with a clay tile roof was 2 to 3 times the cost of an asphalt shingle roof. So there's substantially higher costs to maintaining a historic character of a home. And I worry in these neighborhoods where we have lower income or fixed income residents that people will not be able to maintain their homes, especially long-term residents who may not be paying a lot of property tax. I looked up on my block, there's people on my block who are paying $2,000 to $3,000 in property tax a year. So even if you waive that, it's not going to offset the cost of a $70,000 slate tile roof. And so I worry that will lead to, over time, the deterioration of properties and the worsening of living conditions in those neighborhoods, as people won't be able to keep up with maintenance. And that's all because of one word in this definition, the word eligible. And so I think we need to be very thoughtful here and very careful and make sure that we understand all the potential impacts, short-term and long-term, before we include eligible properties and eligible sites and districts in this definition. And then while I have staff here, I'll note on their website, the San Mateo Heritage Alliance clearly states their motivation for this effort is to exempt these neighborhoods from SB 9. I'm a little bit worried there might be some misapprehensions out there about what SB 9 does, particularly in our city where we have an SB 9 ordinance. So on their website, they state, this means your next door neighbor can, at their discretion, without your knowledge, demolish their historic home and erect an 8-unit apartment building next to you. So while we have a public meeting and our staff here available, I would love to get staff's answers on some of this. So in San Mateo, per our SB 9 ordinance, what is the maximum number of units that can be built on an existing R1 parcel?
Up to 4 units, either using the existing single-family home and building a duplex plus an ADU, or the urban lot split.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, could you do an urban lot split? You do an urban lot split, you could do a duplex on each side that takes you to 4. Could you do a duplex and ADU on each side, or you can only do a duplex on each side?
The total, yeah, so if you're doing an urban lot split, you would be limited to 2 units on each of those new lots.
Okay, so the most number of units you could build on an existing parcel is 4, not 8. And those 4 units would have to be done in a configuration where it's 2 on one side and 2 on the other. You couldn't somehow do 4 units and cluster them all on one side after you've done the lot split, right?
Well, no, yeah, each lot would be limited to 2 units per lot under that urban lot split provision.
So it is safe to say that it's not possible to build an apartment building using SB 9.
That would be correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Are the central and north central neighborhoods eligible for SB 9?
Any property that's zoned R1 is eligible. So, and there are areas of the north central neighborhood that are in R1, but there's a lot of R2 as well.
Okay, great. How many SB 9 applications has the city received since it went into effect on January 1st, 2022?
There's been 1 application that has been processed and approved, and in talking with staff, there's 3 parties that sound very interested, and so we may see an application in the future, but as of yet, we have just had 1 application processed.
Thank you. Last question. Can you explain the neighborhood notification process? Is it possible to do renovations, demolitions, or new construction without a neighbor being informed?
If you're doing a single-family addition, or a single-story addition, or a second-story addition less than 50 square feet, those wouldn't require notification. So a larger second-story addition, demolition of over 50% of an existing house, full demolition, or a new structure would all require neighborhood notification.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, that was everything for that policy. I only have 2 more, I swear. So policy CD 7.1, low density residential development. It says this policy would require new homes in the low and very low density residential designations to be consistent with objective design standards as outlined in the city's residential design standards. So we just had a study session on the objective design standards. My understanding is that people can still choose to not follow the objective design standards and go through the discretionary review process. Is that still allowed, or is this policy going to say that is not possible for low and very low residential designations? You must adhere to the objective design standards? Because it does say require.
Well, I think that policy would guide the preparation of objective design standards for single family, and then as part of that ODS, we would answer a question like that.
Got it.
of is it automatic, you have to, or in general, I think any of our policy approaches includes an opt-out because of just when you're going objective, you want to provide latitude, and if someone's willing to abide by the guidelines, there's opportunity for flexibility.
Great. That makes a lot of sense. Policy CD 8.3, respect existing scale and rhythm. I won't read the whole thing to you. I will just say that I think this policy is too prescriptive and should be omitted because it actually, to your point, feels like it fits within questions that should be answered as part of the objective design standards, because we spoke a lot about scale and rhythm and step backs and wedding cake buildings versus no wedding cake buildings. And so this one, to me, feels a little too prescriptive to be in the general plan. And then last one, in the public services and facilities element, policy PSF 5.1, which I think is about public facilities. We do not have public restrooms mentioned anywhere in this element or anywhere. Actually, I did a search in the general plan. We discussed this last time too, and so I'll just say again that I think we need some sort of goal policy, maybe action around public restrooms, particularly in our parks. As anyone who's had a young kid and gone to a neighborhood park knows, there's a certain age bracket where it gets real dicey. So I think we should think about public restrooms. And those are all of my comments. I very much appreciate everyone's patience as I went through that.
I was so close to asking you to defer the last, but I'm glad I didn't, because you hit me in the parks and the public restrooms core. I was going to ask you to come back with it because I didn't want the atoms to sit there forever. But while we're all still fresh, Adam Lorraine, please.
Well, given the recent comment about public restroom, I would like to ask the chair if perhaps we could be permitted a brief bio break before I give my comments.
You know, as chair, I have absolutely no authority over anything, but I think on that one issue, I think we'd all agree that's a great idea. Thank you. It's not an EST training session.
Yep.
I waited till your mouth was full to ask you that. It's hard to have fun up here, so every now and then you got to do it. So I think we are back, and it's great. Adam Lorraine, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I did just want to start off by thanking those who have given comments to date here, and I just feel that it speaks to the years of working through this process with staff. I think we heard a lot of interesting and important comments from a diversity of voices, as was mentioned earlier, and I'll try to plus one some of those and offer a little bit more. I think I'll start by noting that I join multiple committee members, if not all of them, in supporting the initial staff recommendations relating to extra language for supporting seniors, what was mentioned for study area 3, and extra language perhaps on storm preparedness. I heard a couple folks give comments about having something of an executive summary to make the general plan even more digestible, perhaps, and easy to grasp. I think I would counter that. I think the 10 big ideas do a pretty good job of that, personally. I think they encapsulate something of an executive summary of the general plan. And so when people have asked me, what is a general plan, or what's it about, or why would I care? I feel like the big ideas have helped me pull that through a little bit. So I just want to plug one for the big ideas. And I appreciate the work that staff and this body and everyone related to the general plan has done to partner with One Shoreline to ensure that we're using state-of-the-art regional resources to inform a general plan that is truly planning for our future in a mindful, responsible, and sustainable way. And I would support ensuring that we continue to partner as closely as we can and integrate more guidance as we get to the zoning work and implementation that Deputy Director Dahl described. I'm gonna try to include everything. I did notice that we were asked, does the draft general plan 2040 reflect community feedback and council direction? And I wanted to just mention that I do believe that it does. And I thought a little bit to, as it relates to community feedback, although we haven't finished receiving community feedback. And I'm certainly looking forward to a District 5 town hall meeting on Thursday, in which I'm sure we'll receive even more. I appreciated some of the slides that were shared. As I looked on, my notes, Deputy Mayor Diaz-Nash and I attended the virtual open house, and we got a number of themes that I think resonated with other comments we've received over the years. First and foremost is housing, as a couple committee members have mentioned. We need a plan that will increase housing in San Mateo. This plan does that. There's a lot of interest in heightened density and how this interacts with Measure Y. I think various language in the plan and as brought out by the slides do a pretty good job of telling that story and giving people a sense of what they can expect. As well as highlighting that we're seeking a balance here. There are concerns of traffic, parking, and circulation as San Mateo grows. I would just say I'm excited by a lot of what the circulation element includes to help us ensure that as San Mateo grows, as it adds more housing units, as it adds mixed-use developments, we're using the infill development and smart circulation policies and actions to make the most of it while reducing emissions. Planning for climate change and disaster preparedness, the jobs housing gap, and housing versus office. I would dovetail on a little bit of what I think Committee Member Patel mentioned in some of her comments related to this, and just say that I think mixed use parameters are going to be extremely important. And some of that is indicated in the draft plan currently. Some of that is, I think, to be discussed by council in the not too distant future as we continue this process. And I just think that it's going to be very important that we do what we can to ensure that what we land on at that milestone does a good job of not just of ensuring that the vision of the general plan is doable and comes to pass. Although I will also just point out that I appreciate the acknowledgement of the review that we may get to do as a result. One of the actions in the land use element. Every few years, looking at the numbers that have come to date, as was mentioned previously, I agree, that seems like an important way to make sure that if for some reason it's not hitting the right note, that we take note of it sooner rather than later and consider what to do about it. So overall, I mean, I think I may have diverged a little bit, but a lot of what I believe I've heard from the community, I think is addressed in this plan, including protecting existing neighborhoods, neighborhood and community retail, health and public safety services. I feel like the community benefits dashboard looks like a great, useful action. Similarly to the review of new development, I think it's going to offer a public and sort of helpful gauge of how we're doing. And I think it'll help the public, with some of what has been described with regard to, what does this mean for me? And are we in fact, like the balance that I think is being projected through this vision can be maybe seen through some of this community benefit. For example, as a new mixed-use development comes up, did we receive new park space as a result, or did we get better circulation, et cetera? So I think that'll help with the balance. So that's sort of my overall thought on whether it meets community feedback and why. With regard to council direction, I think clearly the previous council helped shape a lot of this draft general plan in many ways. And so, some of the bones, when I look at the land use designations, for example, when discussing earlier, which circulation plan to focus on, clearly I think overall it does seem to align with council direction. When I think of previous council members and what they've asked us to focus on, I think number 1A is probably reach as many people as possible and put forth a plan that reflects their interests and needs. And, over nearly 5 years of outreach, countless meetings, I think we've certainly made a real strong effort to try and pull that through. And I think the draft does look pretty good as a result, and as what I mentioned earlier. Acknowledging that we need more housing and to find a balance that significantly increases our potential to add more affordable housing, but doesn't upend our existing neighborhoods or the reasons why so many call San Mateo home today. Acknowledge a changing climate and a need for significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, climate action and adaptation. I think of the interest in putting forth a citywide transportation demand management ordinance, for example, as part of an overall circulation element that tries to address this. Local hiring, living wage and job training and apprenticeship programs. I appreciate seeing that in the land use. An equitable approach to future growth that prioritizes equity priority communities. I appreciate the amount of work that's been done to ensure that the theme of environmental justice is shown through multiple elements, and protect neighborhoods and historic structures. I think we have, we've discussed a number of these things, and so overall I feel that the draft plan reflects community feedback and council direction to date fairly well. I want to thank the team and Global General Plan Subcommittee for being, for all the work that's gone into this. I do want to just take this opportunity to like plus one a few comments that other committee members have made so far. I appreciate Deputy Mayor Nash's note about increasing focus on culture and entertainment resources. I do think that some of the elements of the plan, including, for example, the idea of emulating super blocks, will help. I think part of it is ensuring that the plan sets us up for success. But I think the point is well taken that, doing what we can to ensure that we both have like a good framework and some language that underneath that ensures our intent and interest is a good combination, and one I support. I appreciate Committee Member Chin's comments, a number of the comments. I don't want to go there. That's fine. I'll be quick. I feel like I have some sort of like comments on some of them too. Like considering language on acquisition of property sounds interesting to me. I want to believe that councils in the past have had discussions that have tangentially dwelled in this area. I'm thinking of partnering with HIP Housing, for example, on a property in the North Central area a while back. There's an opportunity to, and that may be like property within the city. So I think I want to believe that some of what was described there is within current city purview and interest. But I agree that like we want to make sure that we are keeping all options on the table, and that could be a tool in the belt. Recycled water is definitely important to me as well. I feel like the overall clean water program has moved in positive directions on this. I believe we have some pilot work that is still continuing. I think to consider, the potential for reusing water as much as we can and potentially getting to potable water from our wastewater treatment plant, whether that's through recharging our aquifer and the Crystal Springs, or getting the technology to filter it. It strikes me as something that maybe it might be a little too specific for the general plan, but I agree that it should be something we ensure we're continuing to explore and support. I appreciate the comments on public Wi-Fi, and I feel like I'm recalling some state action on this that we may just want to keep our eye on, and so I think mentioning that as something to pursue would be something I support. I appreciate Committee Member Patel's comments. On the one related to environmental justice and versus still having residential developments within 500 feet of highways, I think that is something I would at least appreciate staff like looking into. I think in the way Committee Member Patel mentioned with regard to seeing whether there might still be opportunities to shift things a little bit without drastically changing numbers or vision. If that's possible, I think that would make sense and might be better. I would agree on public restroom. The council recently essentially began work on a public restroom in our downtown. So I think language there makes sense as it's not just in the future, but even in the present. And with regard to historical preservation, I would just agree that I'd like to make sure we are understanding the impacts and implications of CD 5.3 and including this eligible term. Because if it turns out to be on track with what Committee Member Patel mentioned finding in her research, it seems to me to be potentially exposing the city to some unintended consequences. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. And Adam Nugent.
Thank you. First, I do also want to reiterate how impressed and thankful I am to staff for all the work and consultants for all the work that has gone into this and the product that they have produced. A lot has changed over the 5 years that we've been doing this, and we've learned a lot in that time. I've personally learned a lot. I've seen a lot. Both in my involvement with the city the past couple years on the Planning Commission, but also even longer than that as the president of HANSOM, which is the North Central Neighborhood Organization. And so a lot of my comments are going to be kind of from that perspective. But before I get into that, I want to just kind of quickly run through a list of what other people have said, just to kind of say yay, so I don't leave that out. I do think that an executive summary at the beginning of each element would be helpful, and I agree. And it doesn't have to be extensive, but just something that very much a layperson could get a high level. Could be helpful, especially like how does it affect you, or how might we see some change in the future from what the baseline is. That's, to me, is kind of where the meat of it is for the general plan, because like others have said, it is about what's happening, what's changing in the future. And also, I want to, this is a pet of mine too. It's like, how do we increase placemaking? How do we make San Mateo a more connected and charming place? And I think part of that is, like, my response, just from my professional background, does have a lot to do with getting design standards input that people like. Like, I think one of the things that, and this is something that we saw in our most recent Planning Commission meeting about the objective design standards, is that there's a lot of people that are not satisfied with what's getting built recently, even not even recently, like in a very long stretch. And it's pretty clear just what most people, obviously not all, but what most people tend to like the most in terms of what the design, the neighborhoods that people gravitate towards, and like that's really charming. And I think that this general plan is an opportunity to make San Mateo more charming. And things are going to change. New buildings will be built, new infrastructure will be installed, and getting a place that San Mateo is visually is going to be so important. I think that that's going to get a lot of people on track, because the pushback is often hard to articulate what people don't like. And so figuring out how we can get to a place where, people welcome something new, where it's too often that it doesn't happen. And that's something that I've had really strong interest professionally. The next thing I wanted to mention is seniors and aging. So the age-friendly task force, my father is on that, and he was telling me every day in the past week, you need to mention this. This needs to be in the general plan. And I think a big thing with that is having, making sure that we say something about the age-friendly business certification, so that we can ensure that as we're promoting new businesses and helping existing businesses continue, that they have the opportunity to become age-friendly, and that helps everyone. And then the other one is sidewalks and walking routes need to be safer for seniors. That's something I hear a lot in my neighborhood and folks that get involved in the neighborhood. The sidewalks are unsafe, or it's too dark, or there's cars parked in them, things like that. And so it can be really difficult, especially if you're less mobile than you used to be. And then I also agree that having some sort of discussion about property acquisition, I don't know as much about that, but I think that would be important. Funding, yes to everything that you said, Ken, very much so. And then, there's a lot of stuff that Seema mentioned too that I can affirm. One thing I do want to highlight is something that I've had from the get-go is real hesitation about locating new apartments or additional volume of zone capacity along 101. It does feel, and it continues to feel, to be in attention with the goals of environmental justice, where one of the key aspects of environmental justice is exposure to particulate matter and other pollutants that occur along 101 and such high volume roads. Even if we went to all electric vehicles, there's going to be still lots of car tire debris that comes up forever. And we live in a beautiful climate. People should be able to use the outdoors safely. Children should be able to be outdoors in their private open space. All right. So I'm going to go back to my comments that I've prepared. There's a lot to be said, but I'm going to try to focus mostly on environmental justice and just thoughts around, North Central and downtown, because that's where I have the most experience, just in terms of what I see every day and what I hear from neighbors, friends, and members of the community. So, we've learned a lot over the 5 years. I've also seen people come out, not just through this general plan process, but also, in the neighborhood, also through the Planning Commission. They amplify their priorities through this process and other city decisions. And I think it's important that we input what we hear, not necessarily just what people type in or provide letters, and try to figure out, okay, so where are the stressors that people are dealing with? And there's obviously ones that people have already listed, cost of living stuff, traffic, and parking. And so one of the things that I'm going to get to has to do with parking. And as you probably all know, that I'm a pretty big alternative mode and transit user. My wife and I chose to live in North Central specifically so that we could go down to one car, and we could use Caltrain within almost a 7-minute walking distance, and bike, get to downtown. And a lot of the friends that we've made since we moved to Toronto North Central have made that same decision. And so I'm going to go back to that as we talk about parking in that aspect of people deciding where to live. They self-select, but also there's stressors and existing issues within North Central, and a lot of them are around that. So just zoom out a little bit more. I want to talk about environmental justice. So, I'm going to just read out kind of the goal of environmental justice as listed in this document. You know, we're here to reduce the unique or compounded health risks in San Mateo's equity priority communities. Now, that's not the only thing that environmental justice is about, but that's kind of a baseline fundamental thing that we need to think about. And before I get any further, I want to just absolutely applaud that environmental justice is included. I personally pushed really hard to have this in the general plan, and I want to thank you for doing that. You know, that being said, I feel that the goals of environmental justice could be met better if we step back and look at the collection of decisions that went into the general plan and how they together affect the issues that a place like North Central faces. And before I do that, I do want to mention that I am very glad and appreciative of all that has already been included in the general plan from an environmental justice perspective. I think that it's on the right track. But that being said, I feel that we may end up with a couple of additional policies or small set of actions that could enhance what is already in the general plan. And the reason I say that is when I look at what some of the actions are, most of the concrete policies are shaped primarily as affirmations to provide more funding and rehabilitation to city infrastructure and more funding to city services, things like that, within an equity priority community. And this, as we have recently experienced with the Humboldt bike lane, has already proven fraught. Now we want to be able to get more funding and rehabilitation within the community. Like, that's extremely important. There is, you know, some just general age and neglect that can be amended through those things. You know, and I think page 59 with the goals, policies, and actions for environmental justice in the land use element has a lot of good things. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I'm just going to state like the first goal, which is support the equitable health and well-being of all neighborhoods in San Mateo and all members of the San Mateo community by improving conditions in equity priority communities. My thought is also related to, you know, parking requirements. And so in seeing some of the issues that we've had in terms of increasing and you know, improving the streets and public spaces within North Central, I think a significant logjam that the city has found, and the way to make the logjam to making meaningful improvements is parking. And you know, I don't want to write that off. Like, that is an issue. And it's not going to go away probably within the course of this, go away entirely in the course of this general plan. You know, I'd love it if everybody could just ditch both of their cars and use automated vehicles or hire vehicle, things like that. And I think that that's coming someday. I'd also love it if everybody could ditch their cars and use just a bike or just a transit. And that's something that my family tries to do as much as possible, but we still have a car. And everybody that I know that's moving into North Central still keeps one car because it's just difficult to get around. And it's difficult to accomplish some things without that. And I think that over time, people will eventually ditch that second car. But if we don't plan for that and allow for that process to happen over the course of this general plan, I worry that what's going to occur in this neighborhood is just going to get more of a logjam. Overcrowding within the neighborhood is significantly higher than the rest of the city by an amazing degree, and it's also intertwined with the with the parking issue. This issue extends not just within the higher density multifamily, but it also extends within the lower density multifamily. However, I look and I visit places in the R1 portions of the neighborhood, and I've mentioned this before, but the R1 neighborhood parts in the neighborhood actually don't have that much of a problem with parking. Like, they have pretty significant amount of street space that's available pretty much all day long, except for when College Park drop-off is. But other than that, like, that's, there's a big difference. And that's also the portion of the neighborhood that's very quickly gentrified or gentrifying the most. Recently passed AB 2097 prevents cities from imposing minimum automobile parking requirement on most development projects located within a half-mile radius of a major transit stop. And so if you look at the land use map, that's pretty much or about half of North Central, and it's kind of melding into downtown. And then also the portions that are kind of outside of the half-mile radius tend to be almost exclusively single-family R1. And so I think that what I'd like to see is some sort of parking bonus within a half mile. So if you are willing, so you can't force any development to have a parking, but if you are within a half mile, I would say that you go from like land use, what is it? Residential low 1 to residential low 2, where you can actually do that, where you can actually provide a parking. Now, if you don't want to provide parking, you stay at whatever your existing land use designation is in the general plan. Same thing for, what is it? We've got along Idaho, there's residential medium 2. I would say, the portions that are within a half mile, we've got some other residential medium 2s. Either they can go up to something slightly higher, or it's just residential medium and then goes to residential medium 2 if you provide parking. Some sort of evening out where you provide a parking bonus. One of the things that I've heard from a lot of folks in the neighborhood, and you look at the land use map around downtown and North Central, it's kind of all of the multifamily parcels within the neighborhood that are apartments have been upzoned. That to me is problematic when you don't include the lower density areas, because it's actually putting more pressure on the parcels that are already multifamily. I remember when we first came out back in, I think, 2018 or 2019, there's a huge group of folks that I was part of from North Central who was fighting to get more equitable distribution of the study areas, in part because North Central was the lone neighborhood that included R2 and R1 neighborhood portions within study area. The city just eliminated that. And one of the things that the coalition that came out to for that was, their point was not that everything should be locked in place within North Central, it's that there should be a more equitable look throughout the city. And so my proposal for a parking bonus is not specific to North Central. It would be any lower density, so the lower density multifamily, residential low portions of the city would be more evened out, and then you get a parking bonus within the half mile. I think that that's actually beneficial because, especially if we could encourage through policies the subdivision of lots into townhomes. Again, that's another thing that people have come out to say we want more townhomes. It's actually, townhomes are probably one of the better, people say, oh, we need more apartments. We actually need both apartments and townhomes. And the benefit of a townhome is, say in 20 years, you don't need a car anymore, and there's a garage for that townhome. Then you get an ADU. Like that's the benefit. Like it's a good volume, it's a good thing. But until then, you're providing a place for somebody to buy a home, and I see that as an opportunity both north of 4th Avenue and also potentially south of 4th Avenue. Right now, we've got residential low 2, which is replacing medium density multifamily along 5th Avenue. And I know that folks along in that area don't love the fact that they're in medium density multifamily zone and are concerned about that. I would say, likewise, that becomes residential low 1, and then you get a parking bonus for residential low 2 in that same area within a half mile. Similarly, there's a few other areas within the city that are also lower density within a half mile, but I think that parking bonus would be helpful for alleviating some of the stress. At least my experience that I see in North Central. Again, we looked at where we could find additional parking to replace the stuff that was on Humboldt, and there just isn't places. And I'm trying to find a win-win. I think that a lot of young adults right now see the ladder into being able to purchase a property as kind of kicked out from underneath them. And so one of the worries that I have in our general plan is there just isn't enough areas that are appropriate for like townhome type developments. And you don't necessarily get that in a lot of so what we've done is we've just taken a lot of our existing multifamily parcels where sometimes there's a single family house, most of the time there's already multifamily unit on there, and just upzoned it with the intention that it's going to get replaced with a larger unit. That, again, is not necessarily the best thing for the renters. I'm not going to say that shouldn't happen because we can provide displacement protections if we're intentional about it. But that is something that's going on throughout this new general plan, is we're taking existing multifamily zoned land and upzoning it. It's giving us the volume we desperately need. And, it's been pretty clear direction from council, and I don't know if I see this happening. Like, I don't think R1s are going to be touched by the city, and in the next 20 years. Like, I'm not advocating for that because I don't think that's politically feasible. If it was, then you could look at them. But I think at this point we need to figure out what we can do with our existing commercial and our existing multifamily residential. And so going back to the multifamily zoned land where existing apartments reside, that are slated to be upzoned. I look at some areas within North Central, such as the portion along Idaho, which is slated to be upzoned to residential medium 2. It's already zoned as medium density multifamily. Those properties along Idaho are not only close to 101, like they're within 500 feet, they're maybe 300 feet away from 101, but they also contain a lot of apartments existing. And so those are actually fairly vulnerable to displacement. And those are definitely part of the North Central neighborhood. I worry more about those portions of the neighborhood than I do about some of the lower density portions of the neighborhood. So I would ask that we reconsider those portions, especially along Idaho. It's not particularly close to downtown and resources like that. The other thing that I've seen, and this has been through some letters through the city from folks in the neighborhood, is some concern, and I see that it's been amended to some point, but that blocks are a mix of different zoned heights. And so you can get, and this is apparent in my neighborhood, but it's also in some other places too, but especially around, 3rd and 4th Avenue in Claremont, you get, pretty significant differences in one parcel next to the other parcel. And I think just smoothing that out, I just want to make sure that that's a little bit more smooth, because that is a point of tension that I've noticed from other folks. And I say that with the express intent to not reduce, overall zoned capacity, but just to make sure that it feels fair from one property next to the other. So like one of the things that I saw was the Ace Hardware property is, mixed use medium 3 to 5. I think that was something different before, and it was changed now to mixed use medium 3 to 5. And next door to it is residential low, which is like 2 to 4. Residential low 2. And so that's less of a drastic difference, but I want to make sure that that is kind of figured out throughout. And so maybe it requires a little bit of raising some places, lowering other places. But again, I don't want to beat a dead horse there. So those are my primary points, focusing on, kind of transportation and land use. And I think that those two things are the most impactful. Again, I worry that parking is going to be an issue for the next 20 years in North Central, and it's hard for, I think, some rental property owners to justify maintaining their properties in North Central. And I want to make sure that we figure out why that is and ensure that we provide them reasons to better maintain their properties. And maybe that's an incentive here or there. I don't have an answer for you through the general plan, but to me, that's important. And I think it's important to a lot of people. We have just a quick policy in the equity priority communities list on page 60 for community preservation. So the policy is community preservation, prevent displacement in equity priority communities by protecting tenants, helping homeowners remain in place, and funding affordable housing. And then below it, it's safe and sanitary homes. Encourage homes in neighborhoods that are free of environmental health hazards. I think that those two policies are very intertwined. And I worry that we don't have a good plan fleshed out yet for them in the actions that follow it. So we have an equity priority communities plan as action LU 8.10, which is very open-ended. I would like to see that plan be tied back to the policies so that, like, what are we doing a plan for? What is the purpose of the plan as it relates to the policies of community preservation and safe and sanitary homes? I know the home next to mine, like, it's technically, I guess you would say, a duplex, but the back unit was completely unpermitted. It was recently sold, so we found that out, so they couldn't even list it. But the interesting thing is it's not an unpermitted house from, 1940. It's an unpermitted house from like 2001. And so like you look at that and to me, like I don't want to like blame the city or anything, but there was a level of maybe a lack of interest in ensuring that properties met our codes and standards, code enforcement within North Central for a while. And we have to be able to balance our ability to improve properties with the ability to protect tenants. And I worry that what I see right now in North Central is all the single-family homes, even in the R2 areas, are getting sold and got renovated, and they go to, I guess you could say yuppies, and not unlike me. And those are, to me, missed opportunities. Some of those are great, beautiful homes, but a lot of them are not in particularly good shape. And so if we would be able to have a better opportunity to provide more space for people in the neighborhood where it actually would happen, I think that's better, rather than focusing so much attention on upzoning existing apartment areas. And so that's where I'm stating. I think that viewing what I see in North Central is a bit of a conundrum in that, and I think we need to figure out how, and we have the opportunity to kind of piece that logjam apart. Other just general aspects of the general plan, I see the corridors of San Mateo Drive and El Camino as receiving a lot of the significant growth, which is fine. I think that those are good places. There's a bike lane on San Mateo. However, large swaths of those are not particularly close to the services in Caltrain, which is the regional access hub. And so, it would be important to me to ensure that we as a city work with Samtrans to ensure that bus use is encouraged and promoted and doesn't lose funding. Likewise, Caltrain, we need to ensure that the Caltrain doesn't lose funding, because that is still a lifeline for the city of San Mateo to keep people from clogging up our roads. And so, like we were talking about funding for parcel acquisition, I want to make sure that we as a city have a strong stance to ensure that the regional players in our transportation system survive. And so somehow in this general plan, I think that needs to be a priority. I'm not sure how you do that, but we're also looking at additional transit potentially on some corridors like Hillsdale. If we have a plan for that, that would be important to kind of flesh out a little bit more. Anyways, this is maybe a little bit rambling, but I'm trying to get into the brass tacks of what I see is, this document is so close, it is really close. I just think that there's a few things that we need to look at. Yeah.
Thank you, Adam. I'm going to jump in because I sort of reserved my comments before and did a little bit, and then open it up for others who I think did the same. A couple thoughts on things others have said. I think when it comes to development near Highway 101, I think we need to be a little more open-minded. I'm well aware of the history. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and yes, all the factories and terrible oil and gas development were, dumped on the poor and marginalized communities. I don't think that's a big issue here, and I think technology and design with buffers make development, mixed-use development in certain areas near highways. We have some already near 92. Make them work and not necessarily be, impinging health-wise on folks who have no choice. But I'm open-minded on that too. I think it's obviously environmental justice and health are key elements. But I think it would be a missed opportunity if we were to foreclose, let's say, I think it's study area 8, which is a vast parking lot mostly right now with a few high-rises and Chabad and a few other places over there. If that wasn't, I may be the only one who's frequented that those days, it would be, I think, a missed opportunity if that was taken off the table without a lot more thought. So obviously, I think that's beyond the general plan, and those on council and planning commission, when actual projects and possible changes to the zoning code go into place, we'll have to keep that in mind. But I just want to be a little careful there. Seema, your comment about fees, I think, was excellent. 1+1, which is, I think, again, I think it's not so much as a general plan issue, but I think council at some point in the future needs to give a good look at how we put fees on development, because they kind of come from 10 different directions, and to make sure that we're not putting incentives in the wrong place. The -1 that I will toss out at you on that one, see, with a tongue in cheek, but is the, as an old park commissioner, it's been a while, but I never saw in my 8 years park and lieu fees be a significant number. It was really desperate. So that'd be something to look at. The idea that those park fees are somehow skewing the playfield would surprise me, because that's the capital budget for parks, and there's never money there. It's been really tough. But it's definitely an important city issue to look at. Now, two issues that I didn't bring up before. One is in the safety element, and I think on the emergency coordination with the county and with nonprofits, I think that should be expanded. The policies 1.14 and 115 and action 1.19 are the specific areas. And I think what's missing there is recognition that the event center, which is located within our city but is a county property, is a designated emergency center. And though I'm speaking out of school a little bit, my hat from Samaritan House Board President, but there's a lot happening over there, and that's going to be between that nonprofit, perhaps, and others, and the county. There's going to be a lot happening there, and I think we need to just note that that's a resource, and I think for the general plan purpose would be just to emphasize that in our emergency response, we will be coordinating with the county and significant nonprofits, because that's going to be some very interesting stuff. There's some big state dollars that I think are going to help in that area. Lastly is something I previewed before, how we coordinate with Measure Y, which I went through the plan pretty carefully and the housing element, and I think it does a largely good job of I think he uses the term that we default to Measure Y, better than saying Measure Y trumps, but that is what it does. And it's controlling. And that's fine, that is what it is. But I also, when we talk about a ballot measure, I think it would be a benefit to all players in that if we were a little more transparent, even if we were aspirational or speculative. I think the obvious change would be to, and maybe this is just several options, and obviously council has to think about how they want to put this on the ballot and others, but the obvious change would be to exempt the 10 study areas from the Measure Y density and height limits. And the reason I'm going there, I'm not going to say I'm on either side of that issue, perhaps, but I know that there are folks who are very likely to be hysterical on either side of that issue. And it's probably a poor choice of words, but very passionate. And I think if we get something on the table that makes it clear we're not talking about either extreme, of totally wiping out Measure Y or leaving it totally in place, and I think would probably allay some of those concerns and might give us a better chance at success. How I draft that, how you would draft that, I would say, maybe a little guidance from council later as to, options could be, or they're talking about, you mentioned things have to go to the ballot. One option would be, and that might be the way to put it. And that's in the land use element. I just, pages 41 and 48, and the housing element, it's page 43, but in that one, since it's not part of the burned tree packet that I have, it's section 3.4.6. So I'd give some thought there. That's all I've got tonight. I am hoping that we can wrap up by 9:30, and I think others are hoping based on the smiles and nods. Others who want to chime in dialogue or didn't get, I know Lisa, it sounded like you had initial comments, but anybody else want to talk?
Well, I will bow to everybody with the plus ones, because I pretty well agreed with the plus ones that came up. Placemaking, you and I are together on placemaking, very, very big, and I know Ken is going to join the brand kit. One issue that I did not bring up before, which I think is really important, is emphasizing how we can use technology to improve everything that we do. I've always been a big proponent of developing some kind of a CRM system that staff and the community and everyone else can use to input requests and then see what's happening to those requests. Because I see staff is using so much time responding to 15 people ask the same question. And it's got to be incredibly frustrating, both for staff as well as for the community. And I think there are ways of using technology to improve transparency, efficiency, and satisfaction around. So that was just one idea. But I do want to raise up the whole idea of looking at fees and what we do. I mean, lots of people said things, whether it's what Committee Member Patel said about the inconsistencies, what Committee Member Chin said about getting a reliable source for parks, which is so important, but also looking at what new fees we might want to consider, because one of the discussions I've had with local businesses is, it's great that all these mixed-use new buildings are coming in, but the retail is just so expensive, I can't afford to go there, whether to stay there or whether to be a new business coming in. And we're just not doing a good service to our local businesses, to the developers who are putting in the new buildings, because we want them to be successful. So maybe we subsidize rents. I mean, just looking at what are the stresses to Committee Member Nugent's comments about what are the stresses across San Mateo. There might be some very new things that we need to think about. And I think just making that be an option within the general plan to be further developed as we go down, I think would open up some sunlight. Totally agree with Chair Robbins' comments about being very specific about Measure Y and the general plan, and the fact that we are really would be looking at what we do about this in those study areas, and anything we can do in general to try and take the temperature down or the passion down across the board, I think makes a lot of sense. The idea of really looking at parameters for mixed use, whether it's jobs, housing, or what it really means. And I know that will be developed by staff, but I think that's got to be an ongoing important look as part of how do we make the general plan continue to be heart beating, that it's not just the dusty document, but it's how, as you suggested, how do we look at how many jobs are being created, how many residences are being created, along the way, not just at the end, I think is really important, and adjusting it. And let's see, absolutely everything that Committee Member Chin talked about in terms of recycled water, public Wi-Fi. I would also bump up the emphasis already in the general plan about microgrids, because there are going to be things that happen today, tomorrow, 100 years ago, that we're going to be cut off and we're going to be on our own. And we've got all these EVs sitting in San Mateo. They're little components of microgrids today. So whether it's working with PCE or whatever that is, I think it's really important to bump up the resources we have and where it can go. And Committee Member Lorraine's talk about one shoreline and coordination, I think, fits right in with that. And we've got to do this together. I really appreciated Committee Member Nugent's comments on really specifically looking at people and parcels on the edge of all the study areas. And, it may be a few people, but those are going to be incredibly important impacts on them. And smoothing it out, as you suggested, and being very intentional about that. And how you do that, and I would look to you all as the experts, but I think people have to feel that they really were considered, because their lives are very much at stake, and they're what they do. And totally agree about whatever we can do to keep the buses going, the trains going, we have to, because there is no such thing as transit-oriented housing without transit. Da-da, end of story. But I'd also like to bring up something that actually Director Dahl and I spoke about the other day, about how do we do that last mile transit. And yes, you've got the buses, yes, you've got the trains, but you've got to have the shuttles too. And you brought up the idea of, was it Sunnyvale? Who was it? Somebody was doing it about using those shuttles that are not just going in a loop, but can be called up and can really get people that last mile. I thought was really important.
Cupertino, and
Yes.
it's the Cupertino
Yeah.
Via. I think they've been rebranding it, but it's like an Uber for more of a shuttle service.
Yeah, to me, that's the problem with really making public transit the heart and soul we want it to be. It's that last bit that if there are ideas like that, or if we can work with other cities on it, just having an emphasis on that in the general plan, I think, is really important. And then I absolutely endorse what you're talking about the event center and all of our emergency centers. So schools would be the same thing, and making sure we really are ready, because we're going to need them frequently and sooner than any of us would wish. So I will leave it at that, but thank you, thank you, thank you. And I look forward to seeing what this becomes.
Thank you. Who else? Ken?
I just have, thank you, I just have 3 comments. Well, one overarching comment, I realize that for those who don't know, my background is in planning and land use and in transportation, but all my comments actually that I gave earlier, none of them actually revolved around land use or transportation, which I thought was kind of funny, but I loved all your comments that you guys have made. I mean, I would just plus one on almost all of them, because I think that they're great, and I'm really happy that you guys have provided those comments. The 3 comments that I'll just touch on. One is the freeway and residential. And I'm going to sound really old, because I remember, for those who don't know, I worked on the last general plan when I was a planner for the city of San Mateo. And I remember sitting in that seat, and almost 20 years ago, then Commissioner Kelly Moran raised this very issue about housing and residential near freeways. And I remember it, and remember diving deep into it, but I was not at the time in charge of the land use plan, so I didn't have any say on that part. But it was raised, and I think back then, and think where we've come, and back then we were dealing with, biodiesel and natural gas vehicles, and that was the talk of the time. Electric vehicles weren't talked about back then. And so then the thought is like, okay, come full circle. And I absolutely agree that we have to do something. And I was driving by on the freeway this past weekend. My wife actually asked, oh, look at that housing new housing off of 101. I thought, well, it's great. But then actually think about all the particular matter, right, that's there. And maybe there needs to be a disclaimer. But the one thing is, actually, I now side where I was originally thinking we should do something like that. I'm actually siding a little bit more to be a little bit more open, partly because after hearing your comments, Committee Patel, is I went on this right here, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and it talks about freeway air pollution, and talks about applying an overlay 500 to 1,000 feet near freeways right away. But it says this, and the reason for that is it says typically the freeway near roadway emissions that are of concern are of air pollution policies include ultrafine particles such as black carbon, especially noted with diesel, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxides, and PM2, and reactive or volatile organic compounds. Now, one thing that Committee Member Nugent touched on, which is the electric vehicles, which I would absolutely agree, we're still going to have tire particulate matter, but when you look at what the Bay Area Air Quality Management District is saying, most of that stuff, and I'm not a scientist, but I feel like most of that stuff may be resolved moving towards electric vehicles. May. But with the idea that the state is moving against the sale of internal combustion engines, with the 2030 and 2040 requirements for all the vehicles and even buses to move towards electric, I feel like that might help. And the reason why I bring that up is because it's a balance, right? We're all balancing things. And the housing need is so great that I feel like it's a balance between somewhat putting a buffer up and prohibiting it and providing people housing. And so at the moment, initially, way back when, I was like, yeah, we should do something and provide a buffer where we prohibit housing. But I actually feel like we need to be a little bit more open. And so that's why I raised it. So I hear you, and I'm right there, and I was there, and I thought, gosh, maybe with the need that we're in, I don't know if we could do that right now. The last two are very quick. One is the restrooms, absolutely, and without a doubt, it's the changing tables. And I was just in the restroom right here and remarked about how nice and clean they are, but there's no changing table in there. And there is an absolute point when you have young children, when you're trying to find, you go into a public restroom, and it's fantastic, but then you're like, where am I going to change my child, right? And you look at the floor, you look all over the place, and there's no place to change it. So I know this is very detailed, and maybe it's not something that goes in the general plan, but I'm going to absolutely advocate for changing tables. And then the last thing I'm going to say is, there's an old adage that says, what gets measured gets done. And the one thing in the general plan that doesn't talk about, when we talk about either sort of some sort of implementation or how we look back at it, is there some sort of annual report? And maybe annual report is too quick because we're talking about general plan. Maybe it's every 2 years or 5 years. But the thought is that there should be something that we go back and say, hey, this is a 20-year plan. Maybe at 2025 or 2030, 2035, there should be something that comes back that goes through all the policies and the actions. This is where we've done. This is our report card. This is our grade of what we've done and what we still need to do. Because the idea that it should be more than just a document that sits on the shelf, it should be something that is actually implemented. And so those are my 3 quick comments. But I love the fact that where the city's going with your comments.
Thank you, Ken. Go, Seema.
Thank you. I didn't get to do my round of +1, so I'm going to do my quick round of +1s, which is 100% on the public Wi-Fi. I think bare minimum is if we can get it in all of the city properties would be fantastic. I would love to even think about from a placemaking standpoint, what would it take to have public Wi-Fi in our parks? What would it take to have public Wi-Fi on the pedestrian mall? Like, how can we start to create spaces where people can come, check their email, do a little bit of work? +1 on the cultural experiences and entertainment. More of that is always better. And, I'm thinking about some Nextdoor posts I've been reading recently about bored teenagers getting into trouble. And so, what can we do to give those bored teenagers something else to do? +1 on the recycled water, +1 on the acquisition of more land. The business subsidies, I wanted to talk about this real quick because I am not an expert. I've been talking to some of our business owners downtown, and I've been talking to some of our developers. And what I've learned, again, caveat, I'm not an expert, is that our city is in this weird, what's the word I'm looking for, inflection zone, where cost of new development is very high. We all know that, right? And so to get to recoup the costs of new construction, your rents have to be high to offset those costs over a certain period of time. And the types of tenants that would be able to afford those rents, your Apple stores, your Lululemon, your Banana Republic, they already have a presence in Burlingame and in Hillsdale. And our market cannot bear a third location within that distance. So those tenants, we can't attract them into these higher value rent locations, which is why they're sitting empty, and they're too expensive for the tenants that we can attract. And so how do we solve that problem? I don't know. I'm not an economist, but it does feel like something that we should put some time and thought and attention into and figure out whether it's business subsidies or I don't know, what can we convince the Apple store to move from Burlingame to San Mateo? I don't know, but maybe there's some creative stuff we can do there. The other one is around mixed-use development and ensuring balanced growth. So I know this is going to come before council, that's why I didn't say anything, but other cities have baked ratios in their general plan. Mountain View has done this, I think, in their East Wisman precise plan. They require that every 300 square feet of commercial or of office development is offset by 1 unit of new housing. Redwood City did this in their general plan in their downtown specific area where they set buckets of square footage for residential and for office and for retail. And as projects come in, those buckets go down, and when a bucket hits 0, you can't do any more projects in that bucket. And so that's how they have fixed balanced growth in their downtown. Could be an approach we take here, but it sounds like we're actually going to address it through a separate mechanism, through some sort of, either through our zoning code when we actually get to zoning those mixed use land use areas, or maybe through some other means. But it's something that other cities have done. And then the location of housing near roadways. So Here's my concern is, you're right, it's not as much about the fuel anymore, but it is about the tires and the particulates. And I'm not an expert. Do you know who is? Commissioner Wiggins on the Planning Commission. He models particulate matter near highways for his day job. And so I will defer this conversation to when this comes to the Planning Commission, because I think he'll be able to speak to it in a more informed manner. But I will note that people talk about EVs, but what is being seen right now is that between the combination of cars getting bigger and getting heavier with SUVs and getting heavier with the batteries in the EVs, that actually EVs are putting out the highest tire particulate matter because of the weight on the tires. And so that's the thing. And I think just to echo what Commissioner Nugent said, there's a lot we can do with filters, but we require our residential and mixed-use developments to have open space. And I don't want to require that they have open space and then say, but it's not safe for you actually to be on your roof deck or to be in your courtyard. And we know that you put those Prop 65 cancer warnings everywhere and everyone's like, whatever, I'm just going to be here anyway. And so even with noticing, I worry that it will not deter behavior and will be exposing people. And I agree that the need for housing is super strong, which is why I was saying we should not reduce our housing capacity, but we should think about, this is the general plan. This is the time where we have the opportunity to consider land uses and potentially swap things, if that makes sense. That's it. That's all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam or Adam? Adam.
Thank you. I did just want to throw a +1 to an idea of studying fees, as a number of other committee members have. I do think that it seems to me like there might be a council mechanism that I'm not 100% remembering at this point that may take care of that, but at the very least, if not, we can address it potentially here as well. I like Committee Member Nugent's idea of a parking bonus, and just wanted to highlight that. I think it's a creative way to consider some of the specific challenges we have, perhaps particularly in our equity priority communities. But honestly, I also live at Hillsdale Garden, and there's a lot of cars there, and there are a lot of folks who might have multiple households in a household there as well. And so to me, I think there might be room for something like that, to see if we can smooth out a bit of what address particulars in circulation in the more dense areas we have in our city, while also without removing housing units that we may need, et cetera. Let's see, was there anything else I wanted to mention? I appreciate the conversation. I suppose I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam?
Thank you. So there's been so many plus ones that I've kind of lost track, but I do want to focus on something that I didn't mention earlier, but I had in my notes, and it was mentioned, I think, by a number of people, but I know Lisa had, and it was local businesses and street level retail. That's another thing that a lot of my neighbors and friends and residents in my neighborhood, but also I'm sure it's an issue elsewhere, they're concerned about losing local businesses. And I think what Seema had mentioned is a big part of that, is the disparity between the rents. And so finding some sort of program, because I do feel that this is a community preservation issue. It is the ability for our city to continue to have all the variety of businesses as places like downtown change. Like, there's a lot of new mixed use zoned capacity within downtown where there's existing retail. And I think, to me, it would be tragic if we lost the vibrancy that we have. And so figuring out what it is that we can do, maybe it is also a sort of like a fee or a bonus or something like we do for affordable housing. Like, I think it is in that same sort of line where it's like an affordable housing thing where we need to, in some respects, subsidize some of the retail at the ground floor. Because without it, it's going to be sterile and dead. And we're not going to be able to, at some point, if you get enough people, there'll be enough needs for new businesses because they need to go down and do it. But you don't just automatically jump to 10,000 more people. It's going to be 100 new people here and there, it's and it doesn't just happen. So it needs to be, we need to find some sort of community preservation process for our retail as well. And that, to me, touches the equity priority community that I live in. And it's not just retail on North B Street. It's retail throughout, it's stuff on Delaware, it's stuff on, it's all sorts of different types of places. And so, yeah, that's something we need to be laser focused on, to me. Yeah. Yeah, so just before, I think we need to be focused on, preserving the retail. We need to be focused on funding affordable housing through, and building affordable housing in our inclusionary system. And then also ensuring that parking does not blow up and become an issue with especially what I see in my community. Again, I'm a huge transit but parking will ruin our days if we're not smart about it. And we can make it work. We can make it work to be a better outcome. Let's see, was there anything else? I mean, everybody had such good comments, so overall, I'm excited for this. I think some of the coordination with Measure Y, I wish, and I don't know if this is too big of an ask, this is beyond like asking for an additional action or policy, but like it would be so much easier for me to be able to go through the general plan and just see in map form what would change and what would not change under Measure Y or not under Measure Y, or maybe this is not part of the general plan, or maybe it's like if there's a campaign of for the general plan, like to me it's not super clear, and I'm somebody who's been looking at it for 5 years, like where everything is, what's affected, what's not affected by Measure Y.
Great. Adam, thank you. Everybody, thank you. Anybody else before I know I was promised 12-year-old scotch, but I think that was a false promise to lure me back here. 14. Yeah, it's Zippo. But we do have a little celebration for this, and everybody, as the one old boomer here who's actually been here since the very first one, and I knows everybody from some commission or council anyway, I really want to thank everyone. I mean, the input has been fantastic, and staff and the consultants have just been amazing. And like any document, it's not going to please everybody. Therefore, that just shows it's a good document. There's a little bit of compromise in there, but it's awesome. And thank you, everybody. I believe the meeting formally is adjourned.